Governor Cox has been quiet this campaign. I mean, we've seen his campaign doing a little bit of campaigning, but I haven't heard much from him. And maybe Maura and Boyd disagree with me, but it feels like he's been quiet. And so I saw him put a post out on Twitter or X just a little bit a while ago, kind of saying, no matter what happens tonight, I congratulate Brian King and Phil Lyman, really taking the high road there in terms of, like I mentioned, he's been facing an onslaught, especially from the Lyman campaign. So Governor Cox just wanted to party with friends and family. Same with John Curtis, although I've been told there'll be J-Dogs at John Curtis's party and soda and ice cream. And I'm actually talking with John Curtis tomorrow morning, and I'm like, bring me some leftovers because what the heck? Like, I just got the scraps of the Cafe Rio.
We got cold pizza. Don't be complaining.
She wants day-old hot dogs. Give her the day-old hot dogs.
Just bring me something because they haven't fed me yet.
Yeah, and I think these are really interesting things in terms of where these candidates are choosing to spend their time. I think with Governor Cox, clearly an interesting thing, and I think we should go to something very similar back in the 90s with Governor Levitt and a re-election there that has some interesting similarities and a very similar approach in terms of what happened there. I think John Curtis is clearly shifting the power structure from Salt Lake City to Utah County. I think that is a significant thing. I think that's actually a good thing for the state. If we start to spread our candidates out, we have Celeste Malloy, who's from southern Utah. I think spreading that out and making it less Wasatch Front-centric is actually a good thing. Maura and I were talking earlier today about this comparison to the Levitt election when you had three people in the race at the end. And Maura, give us kind of that breakdown because I think there's some really interesting lessons in what Governor Cox is doing.
It was a fascinating reminder for those of us who are around or not. In 92, Mike Levitt was running for re-election. I'm going to remind you he ran again the next time in 96. And in 92, he had a challenger, Merrill Cook. He ran as an independent. But what's interesting is, same situation, another Republican, let's say, challenging a Republican. The results of that election that evening was that Michael Levitt won the gubernatorial race with 42%. But Merrill Cook got 34%. I mean, that's significant.
That's interesting,
and then you go flash forward 4 years. Mike Levitt doesn't have a challenger. He wins 75% in 1996.
And that's what I'm watching for tonight, more so than does Governor Cox win. I think all polling is pointing towards that inevitability. Yeah. But what is the margin that if Phil Lyman pulls from him? How much does the Democrat pick up? Because I think Brian King was looking for the Lyman and Cox campaigns to cannibalize each other.
Yeah.
So I think it will just be an interesting political science, study when this is all done to see what those numbers show. How much does Cox get? In the latest Noble Insights poll, he's only polling at about 43%, which is low for an incumbent Republican governor.
Yeah, very similar to
Very
Mike.
similar
Very
to
similar to the Mike
Right.
Levitt.
So could Governor Cox come out of this wounded if he doesn't have enough of a margin of victory?
No.
It's not likely that he won't win. Again, I'm just interested to see the breakdown, the margins. How much of a wave did Phil Lyman's campaign make in Republican circles? Because we on social media and in the media, we know Phil Lyman, we know what he does, we know how vocal he is. Does the broader population know that? This is a statewide race, right? Do others know he's running that way? He's got a very vocal and very passionate base, but does it translate statewide is what I'll be interested to see.
It begs the question, what does Governor Cox do with his victory? Which is what Mike Levitt did really well when he defeated Merrill Cook. He went on to just set his own tone and set his own agenda. It shows up in the next election. We'll look to see what Spencer Cox does with his victory.
Yeah, I think it's very much the same that Governor Cox will likely win somewhere around 42, 44%, so he'll be underneath 50, and many people say, if you're an incumbent, you win under 50, you've got problems, you got to reorganize, you got to restructure. Governor Levitt was the model, said, here's the vision, here's the mission, and we're going to go execute that. And then, again, a few years later, he wins with 70%.
You only got to win by one vote, though, right? So
exactly. So yeah, and
the
nobody
margin doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
And no one goes back except for us in this room.
Except for right now.
But you do want the margin so that you can corral the state legislature and have some authority, right?
I don't think that's going to be a play. It really isn't that kind of mandate, especially in the state of Utah. And the governor's the governor, and the state legislatures will always want a little more power than they've got.
Point well taken. So what else are we looking at? Lindsay, what are you going to be working on tonight or watching closely?
Yeah, I'm going to watch that governor's race really closely. I'm also going to keep an eye on the attorney general's race. Again, all polling is pointing towards Republican Derek Brown taking that race as well. But we have a third party candidate in that race in Michelle Quist, and also a Democrat, Rudy Bautista, in that race. So how much does Derek Brown pull in that race? How much does a third-party candidate pick up in that race? Because that has been one where Michelle Quist is actually hanging out with the Democrats tonight. And so she's running on a third-party ticket, but has been widely supported by Democrats in the state and almost more so than Rudy Bautista. And so it's kind of curious. I think Rudy even identified himself as an independent in the debate. And so it was kind of curious, this dynamic and maybe a microcosm of third-party candidates in Utah and how they're kind of seen as a possible next option to the two major parties.
Right now, what we're seeing, and this is, I don't know if it's surprising or not, I think so, we're hearing about lines of 1.5 to 2 hours in several counties in Utah. We're going to continue to check the progress on that and check in with our reporters. Meantime, what else are we watching tonight? Lindsay, we've been speaking with you, and everybody has one eye on our screens watching the national races.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we want to see those national races and how they break out. Do we even get results in some of these states at the end of the night? So we're going to look for that. But I think just here locally, we're focused on these governor breakdowns. I'm very curious about what passes in Salt Lake County. I'm very curious to see if the public safety bond passes. I'm very curious to see the makeup of the county council at the end of this, with who wins the mayor's race, because you could have that entire county be either one party, or split like it is now.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'm joining you in heavily watching the Salt Lake County races, because the reality is our metro area is growing. So go Salt Lake County, maybe a few years from now, that's a Weber and Davis situation, or even, dare I say, a Utah County situation. So how Salt Lake County decides particularly one at-large seat may be the balance of whether we'll have a council that is a Republican or a Democrat. And so I do agree those are interesting. And ballot measures this year are for the first time really in question. I think with the kerfuffle we had about the constitutional amendment, it's bled over even into local ballot measures. Just this that one, the malaise about the economy.
Yeah.
So do we want to spend any money?
Yeah.
And two, just this kind of angst about, or is everybody shooting straight with us what's on the ballot?
Yeah.
So I think watching these requests for funding, whether it's a school district or whether in the case of Salt Lake County, the jail, but also just these other questions on the ballot.
And I think just the sheer amount of asks this year, staying with Salt Lake County, the sheer amount of asks in Salt Lake County for money between the school bond, the public safety bond, and then the Zoo Arts and Parks tax, which are all important on their own. But when you couple them all together, plus we had the sales tax increase that we're not voting on, right? That was just decided by the Salt Lake City Council. And so you couple all those issues together and it's like, well, I find the school's important and sure, public safety is important, but then the zoo, is that important? And then you're like, well, I can't give them all my money. So maybe I won't. It's like this temperament of the ballot, right? Where it's just like too many asks and some of them will fail because of that.
Yeah. And
perhaps.
let's not forget that there was some pent up demand on the 2024 ballot. During COVID, no one did anything like a ballot measure. No one raised proposed taxes. The school districts didn't. We all sort of cocooned on anything but necessary ballot issues. So there's some pent-up demand to talk about schools and other public facilities. This is the first test of going back to ballot measures that indicate fundraising in the terms of, rec centers and things like this. And I think this is going to be a little bit of an indicator of these organizations who have been waiting to ask taxpayers to invest in them. What will 2024 tell them about how we're feeling?
They all should coordinate a little bit more because maybe the county should have gotten with the city, should have gotten with the school.
Right. Not just piled them on.
Yeah.
So, Lindsay, I'm going to ask you about one more race I'm watching.
Sure.
Super wonky, but one of the things that I think is really interesting this year is the state auditor's race. So at this point, everyone's things like a state auditor.
What?
So I'm making a case here. I'm going to zooz this up a little bit.
Yeah.
So our state auditor, our current one, is John Dougal.
Yeah.
He revolutionized this office. And candidly speaking, what he did is he started auditing anyone he felt like auditing.
Yeah.
And he constitutionalized this power. Like, he really made his office a call and response to other independent electeds, anyone statewide. Well, he's voluntarily decided not to run this year.
So he ran for the 3rd district seat
he ran
in the
for the
primary
third district, but he gave up this seat in doing it. And so it's an open primary. One should suspect that the Republican will win, and I expect that he will. It's a deputy of his. But it will be really interesting to see if the state auditor will hold the power that it did when John Dougal really reformed that office.
Yeah. Forgive me if I have this wrong, but isn't it Tina Cannon?
That's right.
Who's the Republican,
Yes,
right? Who's
yeah.
running under him. Yes.
Yeah.
And she works for him right now.
She does.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think she's probably, to those who really care about the auditor's race, and I don't know who those are, but
There
Maura,
are a few
there's
of us.
Maura's,
There's me.
There's Maura's. I think Tina Cannon comes with that name ID. She also ran for Congress back against Blake Moore a couple cycles ago. So she's got a little bit of name ID within the circles. So I'd be surprised if she doesn't win.
Yeah,
this.
so I just think it's super interesting on Election Day to point out all the offices that we pay no attention to.
Right.
Because they actually do have quite a bit of an impact on us. Our treasurer is going to decide what we invest in our retirement systems. So you say, why do I care? I don't work for the state. Well, because the portfolio is so big, whoever they're investing with, trust me, those guys investing your money are also looking at the state
and
portfolio.
they manage the Sitla
They
lands,
manage
too.
all the lands. The auditor can audit any office. So if you think government's a little sketchy, they're the office to call.
That's interesting. And there are the other races, of course, that we are following closely. We're going to get to some of those now. Lindsay Aerts from KSL TV, thanks for coming in and chatting with us. Let's go to the KSL election desk. Becky Bruce is standing by.
Jeff, more results coming in every minute here in the presidential race. The most important number to keep in mind tonight is 270. That is how many electoral college votes either candidate needs in order to become the next president. Right now, all of the major news outlets have different numbers toward that total. So I'm going to zero in on just the Associated Press, which has former President Donald Trump with a 78-vote lead over VP Kamala Harris. The AP has called New York, Illinois, and New Jersey for Harris. Former President Trump so far has mostly picked up states that we expected would stay red. That includes Ohio, South Carolina, Texas, and Florida. What we don't have is results from these 7 battleground states that we've been watching. Even though polls have closed in all but one of them, that means we still have a long way to go here before we have a final result. And I think a lot of the talk tonight is going to be around Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona. Those are going to be states that we need to watch. At the elections desk, I'm Becky Bruce.
Thank you, Becky. We continue to follow the national races as well as the local, but the problem with the local races is, for instance, in Payson, they're out of printer ink for in-person election ballots. There is a lot of confusion there. We've spoken with the Utah County Clerk, who has told us pretty much, well, you shouldn't have waited so long to vote, which is not really a satisfactory answer, but they're scrambling to fix the situation. I'm here with Boyd Matheson from Inside Sources, Maura Carabello, political guru, and also a KSL at Night host. Maura, what are you looking at right now?
You know, for just the moment, I went back to the national map. At this moment, Trump, it looks like he has secured 177 electoral college votes to 99 for Kamala Harris. Remember, the big number we're going for is 270. So if you were to just take this moment of time, a lot of the important sort of swing states still not reporting. So this is a little more expected. I should point that out. But right now, if you were looking at the needle is really pointing to the Trump side of the ledger.
Is it pointing hard toward the Trump side? It is a needle. It goes both directions.
Needle. It goes both ways. It has been, in the last hour, it's moved more to the red side. No, but remember, we are early. So I just say that because I love to build up the pressure, but right now, it looks like Trump's doing well, or doing as he would expect to do.
Well, let's talk about this needle, first of all. Is this metaphorical, or is this an actual needle
is an
published?
actual New York Times needle. So some of the sources we're looking at tonight, of course, ABC News is our go-to. We're looking at AP, which often is looked at to call the races, but who also has real-time results that we watch often is the Washington Post and the New York Times. The New York Times is updating as it goes, and it also does give you truly a needle that tells you the chance of winning the Electoral College.
And it is now leaning toward Donald Trump, with the swing states reporting, but not final. I'm going to throw some of the swing state results that we're looking at right now at you. I'm going to ask if they're surprising or as expected. In Georgia, 74%, so 3/4 of the vote is in. Donald Trump is leading by about, it looks like 3.5%, 4%. Check my math.
Yeah, striking distance there. He's got to feel good about, by the time you get to 3/4, you are getting some momentum there. Georgia's turnout was a little interesting today. I think that'll impact it. And we know Kamala Harris was looking for a high voter turnout today.
North Carolina, 52, so half of the votes are in. Donald Trump leading by, 3.5% in North Carolina.
That's a little expected, I have to say. I mean, Donald Trump this should be a potential area for him. We're still looking at too close to call.
This is one that I find interesting. Half the votes are in Virginia, which I thought was a Kamala Harris state. I'm not sure. Donald Trump leading by 1.3%.
You're exactly right. So 54% in, so lots of room to move around. But if you are biting nails on the Kamala Harris campaign, this is not the number you wanted to see at this point in the night in Virginia.
Okay, Pennsylvania, our biggest swing state, 25% of the votes are counted, so we're a quarter of the way there. Kamala Harris is leading Donald Trump by about 13%. That seems a little outsized, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's too early. I'm just going to say it. It's 25%. It's not enough for us to have feelings about it yet.
Is that Pittsburgh coming in early, Philadelphia coming in early, and the rest of the state, whatever?
That's exactly right. You're going to see those overproducing cities at the beginning, and then it starts to slowly change.
Now let's get down to the Senate races, the one that you were watching earlier, and I'd like to check back on, if at all possible, the Ted Cruz race. It looked like early on he might be in trouble.
Yeah, so we had a number of different outlets that were saying he was underperforming at that moment. This was about 35 minutes ago. What was interesting about Ted Cruz's underperformance is that he was also underperforming Donald Trump at that same moment. So at that moment in time, Ted Cruz was down by 0.5 percentage point, where you saw Donald Trump in the state also almost 3% above Ted Cruz. It looks like he's clawing his way back up. Really what we should expect is Ted Cruz will win tonight, but it will be telling if it's closer than we expected.
Okay, what we're looking at right now, 60% of the votes counted in the Senate race in Texas. He is leading by about 6.5% over Colin Alred. So wait, we have some more races, swing states to take a look at. Could we go back to Michigan, where there are some results in 12% reporting? Let me look at presidential race here from Michigan. Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump by about 8.5 points.
Yeah, this is a strong showing for her. This is going to be a really key state. If we see the results of this changing, if Kamala Harris does not win Michigan, it's clearly a tough night for
And
her.
Sunday night, suddenly Iowa became this bellwether because of a well-known pollster there who said that Harris is winning by 3 points. That shocked the political world. Many people were debating whether her poll was accurate. So here's where we stand now. In Iowa, 30% of the votes counted. Kamala Harris at this point, 30% counted. She's in the lead by 15 points.
Yeah, so I want to build some street cred for this pollster. We don't know how it'll go yet, but remember, this wasn't in all of our watch lists. This was supposed to be solidly Trump. I will tell you that she predicted a Trump victory in 2016 in Iowa. So she has some bona fides in going against the grain in terms of where other polls are coming in.
Do we have any other results from swing states at this point? I think that's the whole list. Wisconsin, But, Wisconsin, only 10% of the votes in. Donald Trump leading by 8 points.
8 points. And again, I'm going to update the totals here. Donald Trump is looking like he is at 178 in the Electoral College, and Kamala Harris is at 99, with a goal of 270 for either side. Who gets there first wins.
Okay, thanks a lot for the assessment of the situation up to the moment. Again, the electoral totals right now, Donald Trump, I'm showing 178, Kamala Harris 99, 270 needed to win. And we've been reporting all evening about long lines of even an hour and a half, 2 hours in some locations. Payson running into problems. They're out of printer ink for in-person election ballots. We've spoken with the county clerk who says they're working on the situation. Let's go now to Hugo Ricard-Bell, our KSL News reporter, who is we're going to go to Britt Johnson now. Okay, we're checking out polling locations in Weber County, which we haven't heard from yet this evening. We've been hearing about lines elsewhere. Britt, good evening. What are you seeing?
Jeff, I'm here at Weber County Fairgrounds, which is the main voting location here in Weber County, and the line is huge. It is wrapping around the building, and these are not small buildings. These are county fair. I spoke to one woman. She had been in shy of an hour, and she's not inside the building. She's still out. So people are going to have to be waiting this evening, but as long as they're in line by 8, they should still be able to vote. It just might be kind of a long night. Seems like they're in good spirits. People are being cordial, and they seem to be excited to be a part of being a good citizen. And I see people out here with their families, little 8-year-old just bundled up and watching her parents take part in this. So that's special, and it's fun to see citizens excited and still in good spirits despite the very cold temperatures. So things are going well, but it could be a long night out here, Jeff.
Any idea how long it's going to take to get from the back of the line to the front where you vote?
Oh my gosh. Like I said, I just spoke to a woman who'd been here for an hour and hadn't made it all the way up, and people are still, the parking lot's packed. People are just still adding and adding and adding to that line. So I don't think they have a really good estimate at this point. But I'm going to work my way up and maybe see if I can see an official that could give me a better idea on timing, and I can check back in with you.
Are people still jumping onto the back of the line at 7:30? The polls are supposed to close at 8 o'clock.
People are still jumping on to the back of the line.
So this is going to take a while, and we might go past 8 o'clock. We've been promised by We've been promised by election officials that if you're in the line at 8 o'clock, you will get to vote. So this might take a while. Thanks so much, KSL News Radio's Britt Johnson at the Weber County Fairgrounds. Maura Carabello with me right now. So we didn't expect the lines to be this long and this kind of, I'll call it chaos, though it's not really. She just described happy people waiting in line, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love that she did report that people are committed to keep going because that really matters. I will say we knew coming into today that the vote by mail was not as large as it had been in the past presidential elections. So we did know that voting was down a little bit. And so now you're seeing enthusiasm take hold. We heard earlier also as well this strategy now that existed since 2016, which is when you vote. So prior to 2016, the strategy was around your schedule. Now it feels like there's a philosophical, do I carry my ballot in? Do I trust the mail? Do I drop it off? Do I want to vote in person? It appears that many Utahns, for probably a variety of different reasons, have decided that the best way for them to exercise their right to vote is to show up on Election Day.
I talked to my mother. She's 86 years old. I said, Mom, did you vote the other day? She said, no, I only go on Election Day. Period. People are set in their ways.
That's right. Now, traditionally in Utah, as a general rule, we've been a third of a third of a third state. About a third of us send our ballots in right away when we get it in the first few days. About a third of us send it sometime after the first week, but before Election Day. And a third go on to Election Day. Does not appear that will be true tonight. It looks like a lot of us waited until today.
And it looks like it's going to be a long night in Utah. One of our KSL News Radio reporters, Eric Cabrera, has been at the Broadbent Community Center in Lehigh monitoring the Alpine split. But Eric, first I want to ask you about lines to vote. Is it getting longer? Is it getting shorter?
Jeff, the lines have not changed. They're still as long as they were when I stepped foot earlier this afternoon. And I actually just left there and made the drive from Lehigh to the polling spot here in Saratoga Springs to try and ask voters how they feel about Propositions 11 and 14 and the potential splits. Alpine School District is ready for multiple scenarios on the table, is what they told me. Like one could go through, one could be shot down, or both could be no's. And then Alpine District stays intact with 84,000 students. According to their spokesperson, they're happy to remain neutral and to leave it to voters like first-timer Taylor Moffitt.
Oh, I've never voted before, so this is an awesome experience for me, and I just think that this country needs a change, and I feel like my vote means a lot in this generation and this time.
Reporting live from Saratoga Springs, Eric Cabrera, KSL News Radio.
Eric, people are happy, they're enjoying their waiting in line, or are they getting a bit feisty?
You know, I think there's a little bit of feistiness energy in the air right now. I'm not going to lie. I'm literally just a few feet from the line that's wrapping all the way around this church building. But people are behaving. No one's fighting. There's no drama.
All right, thanks a lot. KSL News Radio's Eric Cabrera. I mean, if I decided I'm going to go vote, I'm going to take a few minutes, and I find out it's an hour and a half, I might get a little bit feisty. Well, they're feisty in Payson this evening because there are problems. We have developing news. KSL News Radio's Hugo Ricard Bell has the very latest. He's at the Utah County Clerk's office. Hugo, what's going on?
Jeff, right now in Payson, the printers are supposed to be printing the ballots. Well, they've run out of ink because of the sheer level of in-person voting. Now, leading up to this election, Utah County Clerk Aaron Davidson, he's been pretty vocal about his preference for in-person voting.
I have been promoting in-person voting. I've been promoting it. It hasn't taken hold before until this election. It's like they were on a fast, and all of a sudden now they're wanting to feast. But what it does show is that there is a great appetite for voting in person.
Now, Jeff, we're still gathering details as to what people in Payson need to know, but I can tell you this. It still stands that if you are in line before 8 p.m., your vote will count. But if you're in Payson, at this stage, it could be a pretty late night. Reporting live from the county clerk's office in Utah County, Hugo Ricard Bell, KSL News Radio.
Hugo, you talked to the Utah County Clerk, Aaron Davidson. How was that conversation? I mean, we aired it about a half an hour ago, and he was kind of like, well, if you waited this long to vote, you shouldn't have. And we were kind of shocked in the studio by the way he handled this. What was it like to be there talking with him?
Well, I mean, Jeff, we were the first ones to sort of talk to him as it was pretty well happening. Like halfway through the interview or right at the end, you heard the lieutenant governor called him to see what was going on. So, I mean, frankly, my honest perspective on him and his demeanor, this was a man dealing with a crisis, to be honest, Jeff, and it showed. But, you know, he took responsibility for, his promotion and he's talking a lot about in-person voting and also how he's against the mail-in ballot. And he did admit to me that this is probably the result of that.
Well, we also have concurring with you, the Lieutenant Governor of Utah, Deidre Henderson, just tweeted or on X posted, gonna be a long night, folks. So thanks a lot, Hugo Ricard Bell, joining us live. Boyd Matheson is here from Inside Sources, Maura Carabello from KSL at Night, and our resident political guru. What do you make of this situation at this point when they say we're going to be in for a long night? Any idea, any inkling? How long?
You know, I don't know that, but I will say our systems work here in Utah, so they are going to start processing ballots. We have not yet hit the point where the polls are closed, so we don't know. We know they've already, they'll in pretty short order get the early vote in. I will say my perspective on Utah County, to be clear, is this was a crisis of the clerk's making. This was something that absolutely could have been anticipated. Let's talk again about what the voter turnout was. As of 7 a.m. this morning, going into the election day, 952,000 of us and change. So that's 53% of Utahns had already voted. To compare that, in 2020, the voter turnout was 90%. So again, we went into today with a 53% voter turnout. And if you were to compare it, if I were a clerk and trying to prepare for the day, 90% of us voted in 2020. So what I'm going to say is our systems are going to kick in. The processing is going to work. You're going to have to file provisional. And the big thing is if you didn't wear gloves today, you're probably pretty miserable. And you're going to have to warm up your hands before you handwrite your provisional ballot in Payson.
Let's get the perspective of Shelley Jackson, the Deputy Director of Elections in Utah. Shelley's joining us live. Thanks for coming on KSL. We appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So what can you tell us about, first of all, the situation in Payson where they ran out of printer ink?
Yes, I think all the counties were a little caught off guard by the overwhelming amount of turnout, but we just like to keep in perspective, this is still less than 10% of Utahns that are in line and going to the polls. Most of them are voting by mail.
And so as you look at it there in Payson, we know we've heard some other things in terms of Pleasant Grove and American Fork, I think was the other place there. Highland, sorry. Give us a sense in terms of what's happening there and what is the pacing looking like as we get towards that 8 o'clock hour?
Yeah, there are still lines there, but everyone who is in line by 8 p.m. will be allowed to vote, and we will release results when we know everyone in the state has voted.
So how tonight have you been coordinating with the local clerks? Like, how does that system day of work for you?
Yes, for the most part, we're helping answer phones, answer voter questions, directing them to polling locations, answering questions about IDs. We have been in communication with all 29 clerks. We helped Utah County when they ran low on paper. We secured paper for them, those kinds of things.
Any glitches today that you're seeing? Now, I know we've covered the long lines, but I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say I don't think long lines on Election Day. I don't think it's a bad thing. And two, for me, it wasn't unexpected. So I think that seems to be business, like as usual, probably, as you guys troubleshoot. Anything else that you saw perhaps earlier today that was unexpected for you, or are the systems moving as you anticipated?
No, I think the system is working as we anticipated, and I think the lines are attributed to a lot of interest in the election and a lot of first-time voters or voters who just moved into our state or who have moved within our state, and so they're getting a chance to vote. But it does take longer when they have to go through and do that paperwork.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing for all of us to keep in mind, that we do have a lot of those first-time voters, people who have moved into the state as our population continues to increase, and some of those who are registering to vote same day. We have that availability. That's a good thing. And so some of this is a little bit of patience, and some of this is pretty predictable in terms of what a high-interest election looks like. And so inconvenient for those at the end, yes, but also that could be anticipated as well.
And I talked to a lot of first-time voters today on the phone that were asking me where and how they could vote. And to me, that was very exciting.
So this is kind of a wonky question, Shelley, and maybe you don't know the answer, because I will say my experience is that clerks decide this on their own. But back in the day, I'm having you help me set my expectations. Back in the day, the staff would stay really late into the night, sometimes 2 a.m, counting ballots. Lately, the last handful, 5-6 years, we've grown accustomed to a clerk will set a target time, 10, 11 perhaps, maybe a little later, in which they've cleared most of the ballots, but they know they won't get to a final count, so they leave for the night. Just as a quick wrap-up, do you know how late clerks will be counting tonight? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't, and you're right. A lot of clerks have kind of set that target date, and what people don't realize is that election season is a marathon, and the cruelest joke to election workers is we have to come back tomorrow morning at 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I equate it to running a 5K after you ran a marathon.
Well, I hope that you have a peaceful night, Shelley. Thanks for joining us.
You.
Shelley Jackson, Deputy Director of Elections for Utah. And we have a tweet on X, a post from Spencer Cox. May I read it? Running for office is hard, and I'm grateful to everyone who is willing to run in any capacity. Utah is a special place, and I admire the passion of every candidate and voter who works to make it better. Thank you to Representative King and Representative Lyman for your willingness. Now, is this nice, or am I supposed to be reading between the lines?
I think this is the high road, and I think it's a really good road to take when you look to be the anticipated winner.
Yeah, and it is a preemptive road.
Yeah.
So there's no question in terms of any kind of exchange. I don't know that anyone was anticipating, calls coming into the governor's mansion in terms of concession, and that's become a very different thing in our modern politics. A sad thing that we've lost was looking back at when Mitt Romney in 2012, when the night was going on, and they kind of went through all the things, and he made the call. And everyone was complaining that it was like 11 o'clock Eastern.
That's right.
When he finally made the call to Barack Obama and congratulate him as the winner. And so we've sort of lost this spirit of it. So, one, I think it's good for the governor to preemptively do it before we get to 8 o'clock and results start flowing in.
Or don't.
or don't. But again, remember, I think it was important what Shelley mentioned there in terms of this is about less than 10% of the total vote in the state. And so we need to keep all of those kinds of things in perspective in terms of what we're actually going to be waiting on and waiting for.
Which leaves me with a rhetorical question. How did we do this before we had mail-in balloting, right?
Yeah, for sure. They were late nights. They were tense nights. They were often declared accurate, and they were less accurate than we thought.
Okay, let's move along to the presidential race. I want to just bring everybody up to speed. There's been no movement in the Electoral College. Donald Trump at 178, Kamala Harris at 99. About 15 minutes ago, we went through the full list and the current tallies in the swing states. There's nothing really to report there. If there was, we would tell you immediately. But let's take a look at the Senate, Boyd.
Yeah, interesting. Just a few moments ago, in Maryland, Democrat Angela Also Brooks. She defeated the former governor of the state of Maryland, Larry Hogan, in that race and did so quite handily. That was projected to be a really tight and close race there in the state of Maryland. Larry Hogan, of course, was not in the Donald Trump camp.
Yeah, he was running away from Donald Trump.
Running away and almost ran against him as a presidential nominee, and he decided against that, decided to run for the Senate instead. Very popular governor in the state of Maryland, very independent streak, and yet he just didn't have the juice to do that. And I actually think Angela Also Brooks, as a Democrat, she gave, I thought, one of the best speeches at the Democratic National Convention. She is a rising star in the Democratic circle. She's one to keep our eye on. She will have a voice in the Senate.
What was her name again?
Angela Also Brooks.
Okay. I'm somebody to listen for.
A name to remember, right?
Yeah.
Also
Right.
Brooks.
Go. You should Google her speech from the Democratic National Convention.
I'm at work right now, but
as
it's
a
some other
speech-
time.
As a speech geek, and Mara will back me
I
up
love
on this.
this.
As a speech, it was beautifully crafted. It was pitch perfect and very powerfully delivered.
To
She's a
stay
rising
with
star.
Boyd's public service notice, if you want to be heartened, just Google great speeches and don't worry about the party and read great speeches, and you'll remember what it is to be an American.
Yeah.
I have one of my favorites going way back. Mario
Van Buren?
Cuomo. No, not Martin Van Buren. I do go that
Sorry.
far back, though. Mario Cuomo, I think the 1984 Democratic Convention. He used this trick that I'd never seen before. When people started to applaud for one of his applaud lines, he held his hand up to stop them from applauding because he had a bigger line in store. Bam. And I just thought that was just such a rhetorical trick that I had greatest respect for.
Yeah.
That is a good
and some of those great moments really do cause us to step back. And sometimes we get tired of kind of the traditional stuff. And sadly, we have far too many candidates that have become consultant certified and poll tester approved. And we've lost some of that great rhetoric, real rhetoric in terms of principle and vision. And we're just so in the muck and the mire of the performative stuff.
And for a moment, we're going to step back and head to the KSL election desk. Becky Bruce is standing by. What's going on?
Yeah, Jeff, we're just about 10 minutes away now from the next batch of states where polls will close, and that includes Utah, Nevada, and part of Idaho. So here's where the Electoral College count stands right now. As you noted, it's 178 for Donald Trump, 99 for Kamala Harris. So it's been pretty steady in that range, but I want to dig in just a little bit on some of these states that haven't been called yet, but where a lot of results are in. And for the most part, we're talking battleground states. I think it's super interesting right now. The Associated Press hasn't called Virginia yet, but 59% of the votes have counted. And for a lot of these other states where they're not battleground states, that would be more than enough for the Associated Press to call the race. In Virginia, just about a percentage and a half separates Donald Trump from Kamala Harris. and it's under 50,000 voters. It's right about 50,000 voters. Sorry, the numbers just changed on me, and there you go. So, perspective. Virginia has more than 6 million registered voters. So when we say there's just a percentage and a half, we really mean that margin is super, super tight. And while right now it's leaning red, it's anybody's game at this point. And I think the same is true for our other swing states on here. Michigan, Kamala Harris has a slightly larger percentage ahead of former President Donald Trump, but there's only 14% of the votes counted there. So still lots of movement to happen here. Of course, all day long we've been talking to voters, and they've been telling us why they were willing to brave these long lines today. Alyssa Johnston just wanted the peace of mind.
In person, it's my own thought, but that it's going to get there rather than just trusting the mail system and everything.
Clinton Bonnet says he wanted to do his part for the country.
I think it's important for everybody to vote. I think, everybody should go vote and, do their research and, do their part, I guess, for the country.
Again, more polls closing at 8 o'clock, including right here in Utah at the KSL Elections Desk. I'm Becky Bruce.
Thanks a lot, Becky. We continue to follow the developments around the country and here locally where long lines are reported heading toward 8 o'clock. Boyd Matheson is here, Maura Carabello. And Boyd?
You got 9 minutes to get in line. So if you're driving to your polling location, you better get there in the next 9 minutes so that you are in line. And so you'll have that opportunity to actually cast that ballot. Obviously, we're keeping our eye on all of the national developments there, watching those close swing states in terms of which way they tend to be drifting at this point. The other thing that I'm watching, and Maura, curious your take on some of these things in terms of the messages that are being sent. We look at the votes, and we're always talking just, who won it, who lost it. But there's a lot of interesting things in the exit polling in terms of why did people show up to vote? What was most important to them? And because I think that's actually how governing should really be shaped, not necessarily just the wins and the losses.
Yeah, I love that because we do think that the election results and now we know what's going on. No, this starts the conversation in many ways. What did we accept? What did we reject? Why did we do it? The other thing this year with some issues on the ballot, whether that's about your finances in sort of bonding or whether that's about choices you're making as a family, I would look at the whole package tomorrow. And I know we will do this. Not only who did we vote for, what else did we vote? Because there's a lot of nuances to this year's balloting in who did you not and who did you vote for. The other teller tonight will be gender.
Yeah.
I don't usually believe that to be an on-trend or necessarily a defining vote, but I do think what you heard going into tonight in that women are creating a block regardless of their party and men might be creating a block regardless of their traditional parties. I think that might be true.
Well, meantime, we have these long lines across Utah that might extend the voting past 8 o'clock, but you have to be in line. At the stroke of 8. KSL News Radio's Maria Chaleos is live at the Utah GOP party in Draper. Are they talking about this turnout tonight down there?
No, Jeff. Right now they are just celebrating. That's all I can say. They are gathered around the television sets, enjoying the numbers that are coming in. I'm standing at the doorway here, and Republican supporters just continue to stream in, and Congressman Burgess Owens just walked in, and he's here taking selfies with all sorts of supporters and hugging little kids and all sorts of stuff. But one of the other candidates that's here early is Derek Brown, who is the candidate for Attorney General. And he says he feels great about his chances tonight. And I asked him what he'll do if he is elected, AG.
So I want it to be the best, most efficient, most effective, most well-funded law firm in the state of Utah. That is the office that represents the state, that works with county sheriffs to prosecute individuals who are the ones that are violating the law.
Now, whether he wins or not, Brown says it was a fulfilling opportunity because he got to meet and speak with more than 2,000 Utahns. He has a bunch of supporters and family here wearing his T-shirts, and he says while they're all exhilarated, they're also exhausted after such a long election cycle. Jeff?
Thanks a lot, Maria.
Maria, is anyone talking yet about what comes next in a good party? Is there going to be speech making tonight, or is tonight just all about hanging out and watching national results?
Oh, there's definitely going to be speech making. I talked to a couple of these candidates, and they basically say once they do get some results, they will actually be, standing at not sure if it's a podium or by the band at the stage, but they will be actually making speeches.
I think it's interesting, a lot of the speeches, as you look at kind of the priority of that. Of course, we know that Governor Cox is not there at the GOP gathering at the moment. He is expected to swing by there at some point. It appears that he's going to speak a little later into the evening. And so then you sort of have this interesting kind of sequence of who goes next. And traditionally, that would be whoever the Senate winner is. And, of course, that's likely to be John Curtis tonight as those results come in. So that could be the first speech that we hear tonight. Could actually be coming not from Salt Lake City, but could be coming from the Rec Center in Provo, Utah. That would be a first for a Utah election night.
Very interesting, too, as well, to see, as you said earlier, we are a little spread around both parties, actually.
Yeah.
Not consolidated this year. Some private parties going on a little lower key, as Lindsay Ernst reported earlier, with friends and family. And then, Maria, you are at the hub of the Republican Party this year, and so you're probably seeing the most. How many people do you sense are just coming to hang out, and how many are campaigners?
I think we lost Maria.
Oh, we lost Maria. So I'd be curious, because a lot of times they open those up and you hang out for the free food. And I've been to many of those. Boyd, I think you've been to a few. Some are kind of just all of the really hardcore folks who also walked and did things this year. It doesn't sound like the party is quite as big as it has been in past presidential elections.
Yeah, and very fascinating in terms of, again, how that division is happening and who's actually showing up. And it does seem like more candidates are going towards this, hey, let's make this a friends and family kind of affair. I do know down at the John Curtis, it is a Taste of Provo night down there. So not just J-Dogs.
Wow.
They're talking about swig, and they're talking about cookies and ice cream, and they got all kinds of things going on there. So it is a family atmosphere down at the Curtis campaign headquarters. And so that's an interesting thing. Is it more family and personal? Is it those who really knocked the doors and were there? And again, with many of these races not as tight as we've seen them in years past. We talked with Lindsay Ernst a little earlier in terms of not hearing a lot out of the governor's race. It was kind of a sleepy kind of race. And so not kind of that intensity where you have a lot of those hardcore folks lining up to say, we want to celebrate.
Let me ask you about that, because typically during the course of a campaign, these guys would show up at least once on my show in the afternoon, maybe twice, 3 times. I didn't hear from the governor at all this entire campaign.
Yeah, and again, a lot of them have been looking at this as just a little bit more of a sleepy kind of race.
It was an interesting year because it was it is a big, big year, and you're right. They weren't out and about, and as a relative number, so I'm about to list some high numbers and tell you that they're low, but as a relative number, not as much was raised this year. Yeah. Most congressional races in Utah, this year I think the high was maybe 1.8 million, and the low, we had some people raising, I'm talking about sort of the winning numbers, they were raising in the 500,000. If I remember right, the governor came close to about 3 million. I think it's a bigger total, but in this cycle, about 3 million. That's a ton of money, but it is not as much as we have seen in other elections.
Yeah, we have seen some big numbers in some of the more recent big races there. And, of course, then you compare that nationally, and it is just a drop in the bucket. You think of $600 million that was spent on races in Pennsylvania just over the last few months.
So, Boyd, before we move off of this, I don't hate the idea of a little distributed election night, because for me, I like the notion of focusing more on the person that I just elected and not the party, to be honest. And I think when I have been to both Republican and Democratic Party gatherings where many are gathered, the more sort of ambitiously red meat you become with each other, and you get more and more grand. And I like breaking that apart a little.
Yeah, and that's going to be one of the interesting things we're going to start watching as these results come in after the top of the hour, is what do these speeches sound like? Because Maura's saying if you got the big crowd and all the big fundraisers and all the party faithful, it's a little more of a red meat kind of speech, a little bit of crowd surfing. Will these be more circumspect? Will these be a little more thoughtful speeches tonight in a little different setting?
You know, I was thinking back to Governor Cox in the primary. Do we remember? I think we were all together that night, and he seemed somewhat like angry as he spoke. Now you've been talking this evening about him taking the high road.
Yeah, you're so right. That's a good recollection. He had some intensity to him that night. He was really exercised. There have been other times since when Phil Lyman has repeatedly challenged the process legally where he's had some verb. So it does seem to denote a change now to maybe from an election mode to a governing mode.
All right, Maura Carabello is here. Boyd Matheson is here. I'm Jeff Caplan. Our special election coverage will continue on KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City.
Your voice, your vote, 2024.
You have a choice to keep Utah values.
We can do so much better than we have.
On Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out.
Are we ready to do this? We're ready to get out the vote?
This is special election night coverage on KSL News Radio. Here are Jeff Caplan, Boyd Matheson, and Maura Carabello on KSL News Radio.
I don't think the networks realize that we haven't closed the polls yet. You know how they wait till after the polls close to call a state. We still have voters on lines an hour long, and they just called Utah for Donald Trump.
So there you have it.
Good night, everybody.
What? They've ruined it.
Someone at the AP may have jumped the gun there just ever so slightly. We're a minute and 28 seconds past the polls closing there. And so it'll be interesting to see how those start to trickle in and how quickly they call the other races in the state of Utah, if they're a little more circumspect there or if they continue to accelerate.
A reminder, the lieutenant governor put out a notice earlier that if you are standing in line, your vote will be counted even if you get to the ballot after 8. She also asked all of the clerks to hold their ballot and hold their counting until every single person in the state of Utah has voted. So there's a chance that, Duchesne County, you all might have finished for the day and been closed, but you are going to hold your votes until everybody in the state has had a chance to vote.
Yeah, so we're actually looking on the screen right now. We're looking at the balance of power in the Senate. And, of course, the map favors the Republicans in the Senate. And they are picking some up. And we know that they have just called the state of Montana for President Trump. They haven't called the Senate race there. So that's going to be interesting to see if that matches and mirrors. And if John Tester, who's been the lone Democrat there in Montana for a long time, if he's able to hold one more round.
Yeah, so
I want to interrupt. We have breaking news at KSL News Radio. The Associated Press has just called the Utah Senate race. John Curtis, according to AP, will be your next Utah senator. That took 2 minutes and 52 seconds.
Actually, I think it was 1 minute and 30 seconds. It just took him a minute to get it up, which was my prediction today, was that it was going to be a 90-second spread between the close of the polls and the calling of the race.
So let me ask you this. What does this do to those people shivering out in the cold, waiting in these hour-and-a-half lines as the polls are supposed to close at 8 p.m.?
Okay, pick me because this is my favorite answer. Local races matter. So, yeah, it's predetermined. Let's just say it now. It's predetermined who is going to win president. It's predetermined who's going to win statewide offices by and large. But it is not predetermined who your county races will be and who your local legislative races will be.
And if I can double down on what Maura just said, the things that are going to impact your day-to-day life more than anything else is not the presidential race. It's not the governor's race. It's not even the Senate races. It's not the House races. It is your local races. All of those are the crucial things because that's what's going to impact your daily world. And that's why you stay in line, even if you're cold, even if they said, we're going to call the Senate race.
What about if they say there's no printer ink and you can't vote, which is what's been happening in Payson? Let's go live to Hugo Ricard-Bell, our KSL News Radio reporter at the Utah County Clerk's Office. Hugo, what's the latest there?
Jeff, it's all happening here in Utah County. Right. what I can tell you is emergency ballots have been sent out to all the places that complained about the low printer ink, places like Highland. They've even sent emergency ballots as far as Saratoga Springs, just in case. So emergency ballots have been sent out, and Davidson, Utah County Clerk Aaron Davidson, has told me that he hasn't heard back from them, which he says at the moment no news is good news. I asked him if he's going to take any responsibility, though, as to, his rhetoric around in-person voting is key and that sort of thing. He said he does take responsibility, but he also said people should have registered to vote.
I think it's going to dawn on them they should have registered long before. So the biggest thing that's causing it are the provisional ballots. There's a lot of people that just waited till the last moment.
So there you have it. At the moment, Jeff, that is sort of what we're hearing from the Utah County Clerk. I am about to jump in the car and head down to Payson. I want to talk to some of these people who are still stuck in line, who could potentially have been home, well, when we find out, up maybe hours.
Thanks a lot, KSL News Radio's Hugo Ricard Bell. So we're waiting for more information out of Payson. People are still standing in line, waiting for the opportunity to vote, though the presidential race in Utah has been called. Soon as the polls close, Donald Trump has won here. John Curtis has won the Senate race, but there are still the down-ballot races to vote in. Let's turn our attention for just a few moments to the presidential race. I want to run through the swing states and where we stand. Boyd, what are you seeing now?
Okay, let's go to Pennsylvania. We know that it is the Keystone State, and it is the key of this election cycle. Right now, you've got 45% of the vote in Pennsylvania, according to AP. And catch these numbers. Currently, former President Trump is at 49.8%. Vice President Harris is at 49.3%. So we are talking 0.5% difference with over 3 million votes already cast. But again, we're not even quite halfway.
And this is the state where it's for all the marbles.
Yeah, I mean, to repeat again, that's with almost 45% of the vote in. So it's not insignificant. Almost half of Pennsylvania is in, and it is a virtual tie. It's extraordinary, and it points out how close this race is, how divided the electorate is. If we go to the other, what we're calling Rust Belt, Michigan is also, you've got not as many voters in, but you've got about 17% in, and it's Kamala Harris 50%, just over 50%, Donald Trump at 47%, slightly favoring Harris, but it's within a margin at that point. Wisconsin right now, who has not as many, again, 39% of the vote, they're at 50% for Donald Trump and 48.4. At this point, Boyd, I'm making a mistake by not going to the decimal point, right? I mean, the numbers are close enough that I can't be lazy. And then you've got Minnesota, who right now has 25% of the vote in and is favoring Donald Trump 57% to 41.
Yeah, and all of those, the Badger State there, that is one that I think the Trump campaign, if they had a wild card tonight, I think it was they felt they could do something in Wisconsin. And currently that's holding there in the Badger State. Again, they're just at 40% of the votes are in Wisconsin, and it is less than a 2-point lead. It's 50.2 to 48. Well, actually, we are a 2-point lead solid now.
I want to go back to Pennsylvania because since we first spoke about them like a minute ago, that gap has widened. Donald Trump now up by 1.1%.
Yeah, these are crazy numbers coming in, and they're coming in big tranches now. We mentioned just before we were at almost 3 million votes. Now we're at 3.2, almost 3.3 million votes in Pennsylvania, almost halfway there in terms of the total vote tally in Pennsylvania. And as you mentioned, Jeff, the former president has a 1.1% lead. But that is going to be a very long night, and a lot of that will go back to Philadelphia, I think, before we're all said and done.
Is Georgia just about done at this point? It hasn't been called by anybody, but we're talking about 81% of the vote in. Donald Trump leading Kamala Harris by 5 points.
Yeah, I think this is one that is getting very close. I'm watching some of the networks, and they're leaning in heavy on Georgia right now because they're basically outside the margin of error at this stage. So there, as you said, 81% of the vote is in, and it's a 5-point race.
Yep.
So a race that was projected to be within 1 or 2 points, they're now kind of outside of that margin of error, and so that might lead one of them to want to call.
Unless Atlanta is the part that hasn't reported yet.
Correct. And they also had a lot of early voting, remember, in Georgia. So that'll be another interesting dynamic to backtrack.
And again, right now, Georgia is going for Donald Trump if you're looking at the numbers. I think what this shows, too, is in 2024, there is a race to get these things called like there always is on election night, but there is caution. I mean, really, we went out of the gate too fast in 2016. We slowed it down a little in 2020, but Georgia had some complexities and some challenges to it. So I think you're right in that, again, we'll repeat the numbers. We're at 81% of the votes counted in Georgia, with Donald Trump at 52.2%, Kamala Harris at 47.2%, and not called yet by AP, which means we are being very cautious on our calls.
So we're also going to be cautious about Virginia with 13 electoral votes. 2/3 of the votes are in there. It was supposed to be Harris State. Donald Trump is leading by about 0.9%.
Yeah, and North Carolina is not out of the woods yet or out of the realm of possibility for the Harris campaign. It's about almost a 5-point margin now for the former president. So that's one that he was very certain he had to hold. And this was an interesting and very telling thing that on election eve, the former president chose to spend time in North Carolina, where Vice President Harris did 5 events in Pennsylvania, solely in Pennsylvania, and that's where she needed to be. So it looks like the former president's payoff in terms of spending some extra time on election eve in North Carolina is paying off.
We're going to return to the state of Utah, and the state director of elections is joining us live. Ryan Cowley is on the line. Good evening. Thanks for taking the time. We know it's a busy one for you.
Good evening. It's good to be here.
So let's talk about what's going on with these long lines. First of all, was this remotely anticipated? 1.5 and 2-hour lines as we head toward closing time?
Yeah, we knew that there would be some lines. Obviously we were hopeful it wouldn't be quite 2 hours, but that's kind of where we're at. We knew we'd have a pretty good solid turnout, and it's great to see people engaged in the process and wanting to vote.
How are you keeping in touch about when the polls are going to close? You're just using staff and telephones to check in with all 29 of our county clerks?
Exactly, yeah. We're just checking in with them, seeing where they're at. Right now it's looking like we're about 2 hours out from results.
Okay, so I appreciated that as an obsessive refresher. I'm going to have to pause my finger refreshing. Thank you for that.
I know, right?
That's right. And so, again, the decision was made earlier that no poll results, or no election results, I should say, would be released by any clerk's office until all Utahns were done voting and everyone who is in line had a chance to cast their ballots.
That's correct. And this kind of follows a longstanding tradition, at least back as far as 2016, that the state hasn't released those results, giving people a chance to vote before the results are out there.
Ryan, they declared that President Trump had won Utah about 1.5 minutes after the polls closed at 8 o'clock. AP also gave the Senate race to John Curtis. Are you seeing reports of anybody getting off the line after hearing that?
I haven't heard those reports, but I'm not in the line, so I don't really know on that, but I have not heard reports of that.
Let's ask you about problems that you've been experiencing this evening, if any. We've been hearing about Payson running out of printer ink for election ballots. They've been having problems there. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, we have heard reports of running out of toner and paper, and those kinds of things are pretty frustrating because this isn't an unexpected turnout. Right now, it looks like we're, roughly about 10% in person, and that's easily anticipated. So it is pretty frustrating to see that, but it sounds like they found some contingency plans and are still trying to work voters through that process.
So, Ryan, while we're talking about voter turnout, we came into this morning with just over 952,000 Utahns voting, which is 53% of all eligible voters. What's your prediction on how we'll finish, in a couple of weeks? What's your expected voter turnout today?
Yeah, I would expect somewhere between 85
We're
and
going to
90%
interrupt now. Can we
statewide
get this on the air?
active
I'm
voters.
sorry, we have to interrupt because John Curtis seems to be delivering his acceptance speech right now.
Me to legislate, to advocate, and represent you. My agenda will be your agenda. My voice will lift your voice. My vote will reflect your values. And together, we'll make Washington more like Utah. And America more like our children and our grandchildren need it to be. My commitment has been to represent every Utah, and that I'm committed to do. These are challenging times, and in challenging times, you don't need a show horse or showboat. In rural Utah, they like to say, in troubled times, the last thing you need is a cowboy that's all hat and no cattle. So don't look for me throwing gas on the social media fire or giving clickbait to the cable news, but rather look for me riding my Ford up and down, back and forth this state, doing the hard work of legislating and getting things done for Utah. And if you're not sure where to find me, don't look by the cameras or the microphones. I'll be on the Senate floor with my colleagues from both parties. I'll be meeting with Utahns, veterans, learning, listening, and studying how to solve our difficult problems. And don't bother telling me that we can't fix immigration or the budget. I believe we can. Because I believe in the greatness of this country.
It's a little bit hard to hear. Interesting. I've never seen this before in a victory speech. Senator-elect, can I call him that at this point? Senator-elect John Curtis is using one of those microphones like the music stars wear, where it's around your ear and there's a little tiny wire that goes in front of your mouth instead of the podium mic. And so it's a little bit wonky to listen to. So I will read you a tweet from John Curtis on X. Thank you, Utah. This journey has been about getting things done and ensuring the Utah values are represented in our nation's capital. Your support shows we can address the major challenges ahead, managing public lands, holding China accountable, advancing our energy dominance, and always standing up for the principles that make Utah strong. Go, fight, win.
Yeah, really interesting. And the focus, we talked about what would the tone be of these kinds of events. Again, not the big raw meat, red meat kind of crowds. And I thought Senator-elect John Curtis took it as one of those things that he said the hallmark of his season of service would be that his agenda would be your agenda. His voice will raise your voice. And that he would work to make Washington a little more like Utah and America a little more like what our children and grandchildren need it to be. And so, definitely a governing pivot, I think, from John Curtis tonight.
Yeah, he also set the table to say, here's what you should expect of me. He goes on to describe he's going to continue listening, learning, studying, that we can solve political problems. He even goes so far as to say he'll work across the line, which, again, this is really someone who, those are strong governing messages. Those are strong get it done messages. I will say, we do a lot of debate prep with people. I do a lot of speech prep. I do wonder if maybe his voice is going out because he was a little soft there. If you're used to listening to John Curtis, he's got a lot of energy in his voice. He's got a lot of energy when he's speaking. This is probably the end of many days of lots of talking.
Lots of talking. And I think it's interesting, too, to go back to your point, Maura, in terms of where he would be found. Again, governing. He said, you're not going to see me in front of the cameras. You're not going to see me on social media. You will see me huddling with my colleagues on the floor of the Senate from both sides of the political aisle. He also made a strong statement to say, don't tell me we can't solve immigration. Don't tell me that we can't solve some of the big problems in the country. And I think that was an important message as well to say, look, I'm going to work across the aisle. And he's actually done that in the House. So, again, an important governing message, I think, coming out of the Curtis camp tonight.
It seems like he's wrapping up his speech, giving his wife a hug. There's applause in the room. We wish we could bring you his speech, but it's extremely muffled. It's a bad speaker system there down in Provo this evening. This is a guy, weren't people screaming that he was a rhino?
You know, by people, I would have to say that the far right of the Republican Party has a pretty high litmus test, a pretty small list of acceptable characteristics to make it to the far right of the party, is what I would say. And they've got a large voice. They're a part of the Republican Party. So I'm not suggesting they don't matter, but I think that anyone who's defining a traditional Utah Republican as a rhino has probably not really been to Utah and see what conservatives represent.
Yeah, also really important to note that he won with a majority in a 5-way primary race.
Right.
So this was not a eking out a primary win and then, cruising on to a regular win. There were 5 people on the ballot in June, and he got to 50%. That's no small task.
And a footnote, Caroline Gleich has conceded. So it's all over. I think he was waiting for that initially, but it only took him 15 minutes to get to the victory speech. You mentioned he seems tired tonight. Maybe he wants to get home and get some sleep.
Yeah, probably. I mean, again, races are grueling, and I think we sometimes forget just the schedules that they keep, the stress that it puts on families, and apparently your vocal cords. So again, we were recapping that AP and everyone now has declared John Curtis the next senator from the state of Utah, and credit to his challenger, Caroline Gleich, who has also conceded. I think that kind of statesmanship and accepting of results is nice to see, and I hope we continue to see it in Utah tonight.
Yeah, it should continue, I think, and hopefully that sets the bar. And Caroline Gleich, again, young, dynamic, good future, I think, in terms of her political future. I think she comported herself very well, held her own very well in the debate, and proved that you can come in and you can have a message and a platform, and you can make a difference. You may not win, but that's not always the thing. If you shape the conversation, if you get people to think again about what they think they know, that's what this process is all about, and we need to keep that in mind. Wins and losses matter for sure, but sometimes just changing the conversation or just asking the better question can make all the difference.
Boyd Matheson, Maura Carabello, Jeff Caplan. Now it's time for the big picture. KSL News Radio's Becky Bruce is at the election desk.
Yeah, Jeff, we've got a very interesting margin happening here between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. Right now, the Associated Press has Donald Trump with 198 Electoral College votes. Kamala Harris gaining some ground now with 112. We've got some new states that have entered the chat, so to speak. Colorado was called for Harris just within the last few minutes here. And the thing that we have to keep in mind is there's still all of these swing states that are kind of a toss-up. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. None of those have been officially called yet. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro tonight urging voters to be patient.
Counting millions of votes accurately, it takes some time. Our goal is to get it right.
Utah polls just closed at 8 o'clock. The Lieutenant Governor's office has told us they will not officially release precinct-by-precinct numbers until everyone who's been standing in line at one of those precincts has actually had a chance to cast their ballot. And by the way, to speak to that Electoral College thing, earlier tonight we were talking about how Virginia was leaning red. Right now it's leaning blue. That margin has not significantly changed. So there again, this is all very much still too close to call. At the KSL Elections Desk, I'm Becky Bruce.
Thanks a lot, Becky. This is KSL News Radio. You're listening to special election coverage. During those few moments, we were all frantically looking over our election maps. Boyd, what are you seeing?
So the AP has called the Texas Senate race for Senator Ted Cruz. Of course, he was the incumbent there in the state of Texas, and it was a very tight race, tighter than a lot of people had anticipated. But Ted Cruz will get another round in the United States Senate. That's one more in the win column for the Republicans in the Senate. Again, that's going to be very close in terms of the balance of power. Also interesting, just to update on the presidential side, Georgia now, 88% of the vote is in Georgia Former President Trump is at 51.3%, and Vice President Harris is at 48%, so a 3.3 percentage point lead there for the former president in Georgia. North Carolina remains at about 6% lead for former President Trump with 75%. So those two states, Georgia and North Carolina, are getting close to being called, I think, for the former president. But that leads us back to Pennsylvania, where 54% of the vote is now in, and the former president is holding on to a lead there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking at Virginia, and I said, those aren't the numbers. Kamala Harris has pulled out to the lead in Virginia, 67, so 2/3 of the votes are counted. Kamala Harris to 0.5% lead there. And in Pennsylvania, could you give the numbers? Because I stepped on you there.
50.9% for former President Trump, 48.2% for Vice President Harris. In Pennsylvania, 55% of the vote is in, but still a long way to go in the Keystone State.
They're halfway in Wisconsin. We're talking about a 1-point lead for Donald Trump. Minnesota, Donald Trump leading. I mean, this is only 3% of the vote in, but isn't this Tim Walz's home state? He's the governor there.
Got to win your home state if you're the vice president. I think that's the rule, isn't it, Maura?
Absolutely. I mean, we heard earlier some questioning. There's always questioning about who they choose as a vice president, but if you're not carrying your own state, that's pretty rough stuff.
You know, we were watching Iowa closely because of the bellwether poll that showed Kamala Harris the other day up 3 points. It kind of shocked everyone. Well, Donald Trump has pulled out to a rather comfortable lead. 42% of the vote counted in Iowa. He's up by about 7.5 points now.
Yeah, and let's go to Michigan, which is also a real critical piece of that blue wall for the Harris campaign. And the Harris campaign continues to be in front by less than a point. It's 49.7. For Vice President Harris, 48.6 for former President Trump. But they're still very early there in the state of Michigan, just 21% of the vote in at this point.
But we have Arizona results. I didn't even realize that. Right now, Kamala Harris in the lead with, let me look here, 48%, so almost half of the vote counted. Kamala Harris pulling out to a 0.9% lead over Donald Trump.
Yeah, also important in that there have been 9 precincts in eastern Arizona that have extended their voting hours because of some of the irregularities and some of the challenges they had early on in the day today. So again, this is another example of something went wrong and people are getting it right. And that's an important thing. We have processes in place for when things do go wrong. Arizona appears to be solving those. They are going to have 9 precincts there in eastern Arizona County that will keep their lights on just a little bit longer.
I'm going to give a shout out to Nebraska. Nebraska is one of only 2 states that allow their citizens to split their electoral vote, which I think is interesting and may be a solution into the future. And they have 5 electoral votes. Right now, 3 are going for Trump and 2 are going for Kamala Harris.
I'm sorry. Can we go to Britt right now? Just tell me in my ear. Yeah, okay. KSL News Radio's Britt Johnson is at the Weber County Fairgrounds. Am I hearing this right? A fight just broke out there?
Jeff, yes. Things have gotten pretty exciting. Ricky Hatch, the Weber County auditor, and clerk just popped over and told me they broke up a fight right outside the building. Now, it wasn't adult voters. It looks like it was teenagers, but emotions running high around here. And luckily, we have all of the people that were in line inside the building now. So I get anything weird like that happening outside shouldn't be affecting those that are still trying to vote. But it's interesting because we had a printer hiccup here a little bit earlier, same thing that they're dealing with Payson. They had to call out to get a shipment of toner to come back brought to them. They also had to call out and get several more workers, about 10 or more. They just didn't have enough. They didn't expect this kind of turnout. So things are just still pretty darn exciting around here.
Yeah, first of all, was anybody arrested in this fight? And clearly it didn't have all that much to do with the voting because the people who were voting were inside, the fight was outside. But were there arrests?
No, not so far. I think they got it taken care of before things got cleared out too much. But it just, there's a lot of emotions, it seems like, even inside, outside.
All right, thanks a lot for the update. We appreciated the Weber County Fairgrounds. There's KSL News Radio's Britt Johnson. So where were we? I'm sorry, that came up. We had to go straight to air, right?
As always, you got to get that breaking news as we move along. We're continuing to watch some of the things take place on the Senate front. As we mentioned just a moment ago, Ted Cruz has been declared the winner in the state of Texas, and that balance of power in the United States Senate is going to be very crucial, very critical space. Currently, you've got the Republicans with 47. Remember, you got to get to 50 to be in the majority. That is if your party controls the White House as well, because the vice president is the tie-breaking vote. So right now, the Republicans have the advantage, and a lot of the eyes are going to be on places like Montana, where right now you've currently got the sitting senator, again, very, very early, but John Tester is going to be in for a long and difficult night to see if he can hold on to that seat.
You know, Maura, you turned me on to the Needle.
Right.
The Needle at the New York Times.
It's fun, isn't
on their
it?
homepage, they have this needle that says whether the election is leaning toward Trump or leaning toward Kamala Harris. Have you looked at it in the last little while?
Yeah, I've just been looking. Okay, so I'm going to move. I'm going to go deep needle here and say they are predicting what the tipping point is. So if Trump continues, as he's doing now, Michigan, if Michigan goes for Trump, that will tip him over the 270. We have gone from slightly leaning to Trump to heavily leaning. So if their needle estimates were right, the New York Times is telling us that Trump would end the night or end this election with 295 electoral votes. Remember, he needs 270 to win. What's also really interesting is the New York Times needle is also currently predicting that Trump would win the popular vote by 0.8%. So they're saying not only would he win the Electoral College, that he would win the popular vote.
Now, are these probabilities that Trump has an 82% chance of victory, according to the Needle? Is this kind of like the Yankees had a 94% chance of winning Game 5? Is it like that?
Two outs, bases loaded, and bad things happen, Jeff.
Exactly.
Bad things happen.
That's a good comparison.
Okay, so where we stand right now, the electoral count in the real world, not the theoretical world of the Needle, what is it, 198 to 112 at this point?
112, that's correct.
Okay, and we have states coming in. You're watching Michigan most closely, which hasn't reported a whole lot of result yet at this point.
No, we're still just at 21, almost 22% of the vote in there in Michigan. And again, it's just it's 0.2% lead for Vice President Harris at this stage. And again, that is a razor-thin one, but a long, long way to go in Michigan.
You're listening to special election coverage on KSL News Radio, 8:31 in the evening. And we go back to some local politics in Utah County where they've had so many problems. KSL News Radio's Eric Cabrera is live at the Broadbent Community Center in Lehigh, where he's been watching long lines through the evening, where residents are voting on whether to split up the Alpine School District. Eric, what's going on?
Jeff, we're actually headed over now to Saratoga Springs. Also, same deal over here. For some in northern Utah County, Prop 11 gives them a new district. For others, like where I'm at, Saratoga Springs, it's actually Proposition 14. Both would essentially split from Alpine School District if voters push them through. Voters like the ones behind me here, braving the cold, wet weather, still past 8 o'clock. I also caught up with the Saratoga Springs City Council member Chris Karn, who shared what happens next if Proposition 14 goes the distance.
I think it's going to dawn on them they should have registered long before. So the biggest thing that's causing it are the provisional ballots. There's a lot of people that just waited till the last.
Whichever way things shake out, Utahns are out here staying in line to make that choice. Reporting live from Saratoga Springs, Eric Cabrera, KSL News Radio.
Yeah, so really interesting, Maura. This goes back to our conversation earlier of staying in line. Here we have a potential district split. And again, if you're just showing up to vote just for the top of the ticket, the presidential, pretty easy to say it's kind of cold, it's a little late, and go home. But this is one of those where a district split, which impacts all of those communities, all of those kids, all of those teachers. This is one of those where this is why you stand in line, because this is what's really where the rubber's gonna hit the road in our local communities.
Yeah, and these differences between winning and losing are going to be in the hundreds. More than likely, maybe in the thousands, but often in the hundreds, and the ripple effect of local decisions. So let's talk about a school district split. Clearly, right away, it starts to impact where your kids' friends go to school, the teachers you have, where you're driving. But then it also starts to affect your pocketbook because Now you're going to draw from different tax bases. Maybe you need to close schools. Maybe you need to build new schools. These local elections really do. We hear all these headline issues. The economy has been on the top of everyone's list. Home prices, all of these things. But we have to ask ourselves, who decides where homes get built? Well, it's your local city councils, your local mayors, and your county councils, and your county mayors. There's some ripple down from the state, but all of our top issues, by and large, those decisions are made by local government.
Yeah, and those local things in terms of how much property tax you're paying has an impact on all that, and even just some of the regulatory things that take place, the zoning issues in terms of where homes can be built, where they can't, what processes they have to go through. A lot of those things we talk about in terms of home affordability, that's not happening in Washington, D.C. That's happening in your own backyard.
But this evening, they're not worried about home affordability or any meat and potato issues at the Utah State GOP party in Draper this evening. KSL News Radio's Maria Chaleos is there. Is it getting festive?
It's pretty busy here. They just heard from Senator Mike Lee, who came to them via Zoom from Mar-a-Lago. Now that the Associated Press is calling a Trump victory here in Utah, he did address this crowd, also telling them that he's optimistic that they're going to win, that former President Trump is going to win in Virginia as well. And the senator thanking the people here in Utah that made it happen. We also heard from Congresswoman Celeste Malloy. She addressed the crowd via Zoom from her gathering, and she called it a pep talk, saying that she's optimistic for party wins tonight, and she's also more optimistic for smaller, more accountable, less intrusive government. She had a bunch of little girls by her and said that at her gathering she's hoping that she can inspire young girls to run for office, and promised to address the group again when the results are in. We also know that there has been Decision Desk HQ is calling the race for Congressman John Curtis. So people have been looking at that news on their phones. Haven't been talking about it here, really. Nobody talking about it publicly. And that is in his Senate race to fill the seat vacated by Senator Mitt Romney.
Maria, that is somewhat confusing. John Curtis held a separate party down in Provo. You mean they didn't put him on the screen when he made his victory speech?
Not yet. Did he actually make a victory speech?
Oh, he made the speech about 20 minutes ago.
Nice. Nope, we did not see John Curtis on the screen here. That does make me wonder what's going to happen with the governor, who is also holding a separate celebration at the governor's mansion tonight.
So this may be a night of supply chain and ink and technical issues at the state party.
Is there anything we read into all of that? Nah.
I'm sorry, it's really noisy here. What was that?
It's okay. Is there anything we read into not showing John Curtis? You mentioned they're not really talking about his race at the Utah State GOP party tonight.
No, I'm not going to read anything into it because I haven't asked anybody about it. But I'll tell you what, next go around, I will ask some people here and we'll see what we can find out.
Maria, anything else, anyone else kind of lining up in terms of speeches? Anyone else getting ready to step up and declare a victory or make some comments?
No, really, truly, the only candidates that we've seen that are here, Burgess Owens and Derek Brown, and Mike Kennedy, who was here for a minute, but I went to talk to him, haven't spotted him for a little bit. He may have left for a while. So at this point, we know that when the results start coming in that they're going to make speeches, but right now nobody's standing by for that.
Thanks a lot, Maria Chaleos, live at the Utah State GOP party in Draper this evening. Joining us live on KSL News Radio, the communications director of the Utah Democratic Party, Mason Hughes. Thanks for joining us. This race was kind of over before it started this evening.
Yeah, so the Associated Press made their call, the minute that polls were supposed to officially close. And Caroline sent out a statement conceding the race and congratulating Congressman Curtis. And I'll admit I was a little disappointed that the race was called so quickly because we are aware that people in Utah are still in line to vote. And the lieutenant governor, a Republican lieutenant governor, made it very clear that we did not want to be in a position where we were reporting election results before everyone in the state had had a chance to make their voice heard, because you do something like this, and there's a chance that it discourages someone from staying in line. There's a chance that it discourages people from making their voice heard in some of these down ballot races as well. That being said, Caroline has done a phenomenal job as a Senate candidate. She has engaged so many young people. I mean, we're seeing youth voter turnout, especially on the Democratic side, especially with young women. Caroline Gleick is one of the greatest Senate candidates that the Utah Democrats have had in years, and I'm so proud to have been able to work with her this year.
So who else, as you said, the national press has called it before the polls are closed, but who else are you watching are hopeful for tonight from the Democratic tickets?
In the state of Utah, we really believe we've got a shot to flip the county council, the Salt Lake County Council, I should say. We have some phenomenal candidates running in competitive races here, Natalie Pinckney for the at-large seat and Zach Robinson for District 6. And we're also keeping an eye on some of our state house and state senate districts as well. Obviously, we don't have any results for those because of the lieutenant governor's, request that nothing be reported until every polling place is closed. But I believe we have an opportunity to chip away at the Republican supermajority this year.
And what about the parties tonight and the gatherings? What has the Democratic Party planned for those who have worked hard during the election season and want to gather today and celebrate the effort?
Yeah, we're over here at Woodbine Food Hall right now. We've got a lot of our candidates. The place is absolutely packed. It's hard to get from one end of the building to another, but it's electric here. People are excited to see what happens. They're excited to see how their hard work has panned out. We reached out to voters in Utah 1.4 million times this year, and that's through the work of our amazing coordinated campaign and through the work of staff and volunteers. And that's record-breaking. That is more reach-out attempts than has occurred in 2018, 2020, and 2022 combined. So we've really stepped it up this year. We're working extra hard, and I am excited to see how the people of Utah have reacted to that.
Great stuff, Mason. And I could not agree more with your assessment of AP calling it before it was closed. I think that was a big mistake, and AP doesn't get it wrong very often, but they clearly jumped the gun on this one. And I agree. I think Caroline Gleick did a great job and was a great candidate. And I think her future is very bright in terms of what she can do and the influence she can have. And we were talking earlier about the fact that it's not always just the win or loss. Sometimes it's asking the right question or the better question or changing the conversation. And I often ask candidates, what makes all of this worth it, even if you get to election night and you don't win? And I think Caroline Gleick can answer that in a really powerful way tonight.
Yeah, no, she really asked some important questions of Curtis. She said, why has your conservative climate caucus, why is your conservative path on climate legislation, why is it taking so long? Why is it so open to oil and gas lobbyists? And she's also asked Curtis, Curtis famously said in, I believe, 2022 on television that he wishes as a man he didn't have to make decisions about women's bodies and their reproductive freedom. And Caroline called him on that. And that's absolutely what we should do. And that's why Utah Democrats are going to keep running these great candidates so that we can hold our elected officials accountable and show people that there are other options besides, the Republican Party.
Thanks so much for joining us, the Communications Director for Utah's Democratic Party, Mason Hughes. And if you're wondering when we're going to start seeing some election results here in Utah, we do have the presidential race over. We have the Senate race over. But when do we get results? Deidre Henderson, Lieutenant Governor, just posted on X. Looks like around 10 p.m. I know everyone wants results, including me. Thanks for your patience, Utah.
That's right. You're getting more for your money than you ever expected from tonight's election results. You're welcome. I want to move to just a couple of national results that have recently been called. It looks like Fox and ABC have called Iowa for Trump. AP has not yet. So that's an interesting distinction there for Iowa. Also, an issue in several states this cycle, and a lot of lead up about how it would impact presidential politics is the issue of abortion. It looks like Colorado has approved a state constitutional amendment enshrining abortion rights and protections. That's per the AP's reporting, and it looks like Florida has rejected that. It should be noted in Florida, the bar to pass this was 60%, and it looks like that enshrining in the Constitution hit a 57%. So the majority of Floridians voted for it, but it needed to get to 60, and it didn't make it.
The marijuana initiative also went down in the state of Florida tonight, and also the AP has just called the Iowa for former President Trump, so that takes the former president up to 210 electoral votes. Vice President Kamala Harris is at 112, and we're continuing to watch all of those results continue to come in. The state of Pennsylvania, the keystone of the night, 19 electoral votes, and both of these candidates, this is the pathway. It has to go through Pennsylvania, and they are now at 60% of the vote tally is in Pennsylvania. Former President Trump continues to hold a lead. He is at 50.9%. Vice President Kamala Harris at 48.2%.
But in the state of Pennsylvania, they don't begin counting the mail-in ballots till now.
That's right. And so we continue to watch that, and my guess is we're going to continue to see these margins tighten in Pennsylvania as we go through the remaining 40%.
KSL News Radio special election coverage continues. Let's go to the KSL election desk, and here's Becky Bruce.
Jeff, polls are going to close in under 20 minutes for California and the Pacific Northwest. So while former President Donald Trump has held a healthy electoral college lead for most of the night, Vice President Kamala Harris will likely pick up some votes from those states. The question, of course, will it be enough to bring her back even with the former president? Right now, they're standing at just shy of a 100-vote difference on the Electoral College count. Donald Trump has 210. Kamala Harris has 112. That's, of course, at least according to the Associated Press. It gets really confusing now because all of these different news outlets that we follow all have different interpretations and different decisions about when they're calling the races. Either way, those 7 battleground states we've been watching all night are still out, which means their 93 Electoral College votes are still in play, and whoever picks those up, that's going to be critical for that person. Here in Utah, polls closed almost an hour ago. Because of long lines, we're expecting a little longer of a wait for any results. Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson just posting a few moments ago on social media that first batch of results is likely to come now at about 10 o'clock. At the elections desk, I'm Becky Bruce.
Well, this raises the question of paths to victory for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Donald Trump's path seems to be widening. Kamala Harris seems to be narrowing. Boyd, if Kamala Harris were to win Pennsylvania but didn't win Wisconsin, does she still have a shot, or is it over?
If she wins Pennsylvania, everything's on the table. So if she wins Pennsylvania, if she wins Wisconsin and Michigan, and she holds on to that tiny little precinct in Nebraska, she would be the next president of the United States.
Could she lose Wisconsin while holding the rest of that?
If she loses Wisconsin, then she's got to make up ground somewhere else. So then you look at Arizona and Nevada being really critical, because it does not appear that the vice president is going to win Georgia or North Carolina. Again, based on where we are, we're getting pretty close to calling those races. So absent North Carolina and Georgia, if she were to lose Wisconsin, she'd have to win Arizona and Nevada to still have a path.
Maura Carabello, your brow is furrowed.
My brow is furrowed. These numbers are so small, I tell you what. I was just looking at how far along we are in the vote count. Georgia, we're at 80+%. Donald Trump is holding a 9-point lead there. North Carolina, we're at 84%. Donald Trump is holding just over a 2 percentage point there. Pennsylvania, fewer votes counted, 62% of the votes in there. And I'm going to say it's within a point, Boyd. I mean, because at this point we're going down to the decimals. And then right now, with very few votes in, so 5% in Minnesota, Wisconsin, you're looking at very few of the numbers in yet. So too early to call, but those are all showing red right now. And again, too early to call. But, you have 50% Boyd, 56% in Wisconsin, and Donald Trump is up 50 percentage points to 48.6. And the ever-important Michigan is 49.9 to just changed 50% to 48.3. So again, we're down to secondary percentage points when you look at those. It still is an interesting night. I think at this point, Trump is looking good, but what you and I know, you and I have now spent several election nights together, and we know that these numbers, as Jeff just asked about the pathways, there are still paths open for Kamala Harris, although looks like the door is closing again on Georgia and North Carolina. They have not been called yet.
That's correct.
But the door seems to be closing for Kamala Harris on those 2 swing states.
Yeah, definitely closing the door there. Also very interesting, let's bring it out west. Arizona's got half of their ballots are in now in Arizona, and we are talking about 0.2% difference between the former president and the vice president. So currently, former President Trump is at 49.7%. And Vice President Harris is at 49.5.
So this raises a few questions. First of all, before this election took place, before the polls opened this morning, there was a mantra of every vote counts. Are we finding that to be true as the results come in?
Probably more so than we have at any point in history. 7 swing states, all polling within the margin of error, and many of them polling within 1 or 2 percentage points total. And so it is one of those where every last vote is going to matter in all of these races.
So I'm going to tell you like a creaky old person story now, because I have been doing political politics for probably about 30 years now. And while my cynicism may be growing, my testimony of every vote counting gets stronger with every single election. It's interesting. The more involved you get in partisan races, be that as your local city council or the president, Boyd, isn't it interesting that you get less cynical about an individual voter? The votes really do add up, and what becomes more and more apparent is personal influence. So someone who's energized about folks can impact their neighborhood. They can certainly impact their families, but they start to impact their communities. Someone who can get energized and spread the word starts to impact more. So while I might be a little more cynical about the partisan nature of our communications, I am less cynical than I ever have been about the power of the individual vote.
Yeah, and the individual vote and that positive power. You're never going to convince someone to change their opinion by hitting them over the head with yours.
That's right.
It doesn't work. And anyone who's married or anyone who's ever had a teenager knows it does not work. And so I thought it was interesting. I think both, if we take it back to the national level, I think both the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign made very significant mistakes down the stretch. There was a little moment there where it felt like things had shifted and the vice president was kind of cruising along and everyone thought, oh, she's got momentum coming down the home stretch. And then suddenly there was 6 days where the Harris campaign pulled out the President Biden playbook and were just hammering people over the head with all of the negativity around former President Trump. That was the mantra, that was the message, that was the advertising.
That was just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and they stalled. It stalled their momentum. They pivoted at the end, and we'll see if that was enough to really shift it. And then, of course, the momentum kind of swung to former President Trump. And then the last 5 days, very dark, very demonic in terms of talking about everybody that wasn't associated with his campaign. And I think that hurt him in the end because, remember, we're talking about the 1 in 10 voters who waited to the last week to decide who they were going to vote to, the persuadables. And those persuadables were not going to be persuaded by being hit over the head with what you're against. They want to know exactly what Maura was saying. I want to know a neighbor who's going to tell me why they're energized and excited and what this candidate is for.
Yeah, and you hit on something that's so interesting and so intuitive, and campaigns forget it over and over again, which is they start focusing on the wrong thing. And what you find is they start to dislike their opponent so much that they quit telling us why they should why we should vote for them.
Could you take a quick look at Arizona? Where do our numbers stand right now? Could anybody bring that up real quick?
Arizona, again, we're at 50% of the vote there in Arizona. And we continue to be right at
49.7 for Donald Trump, 49.5 for Kamala Harris.
So let's find out what's going on. We're going to go live to KTAR news reporter Colton Krolak in Phoenix, our sister station down there. What's going on tonight?
Yeah, so I'm over here at the Maricopa County Tabulation Election Center. Obviously, Maricopa County is our largest county by a long stretch. So this is kind of where it all is right now, kind of the main place to be. We're still waiting on some of the results from those in-person voting locations. Those centers have tabulators. They are not connected to the internet. They're on memory cards. Those memory cards are brought back here to the tabulation center and then uploaded throughout the night. Those results that you're seeing right now are the early ballots that were brought in, turned in by last Tuesday. So that's what you're seeing right now, but still waiting for those early votes to be uploaded.
Colton, we remember 4 years ago in Maricopa County, probably at that very building where you all are now. It was a wild scene. Anything like that again this year?
Luckily, no. And I wasn't here for that one, but I know there's been a number of security enhancements since that point. There's permanent black fencing that's immediately surrounding the perimeter. Then there's temporary fencing surrounding that. They have concrete barriers and traffic barriers that prevent cars from ramming into the building. Inside, it looks really like airport security. There's metal detectors, there's armed security. I know that there's also been some talks about having drones in the air tonight. Also, Maricopa County said they might bring in some snipers to watch over the area. Haven't seen anything like that. I haven't seen any protesters or anything, but I know that they are ready in case anything like that does pop off.
This is a nail biter in Arizona. Is there any indication when we might get results? It took a while last time.
Yeah, I know that some of those results might be delayed. I think they're stressing patience. One thing they do, election officials are stressing, is that, news organizations call elections, not them. It takes about 10 to 13 days for them to count every ballot. Obviously, in some states where it's not as close, you can call the races much sooner, but here, probably not going to be that. It might be some days before we really have an answer in some of these big elections.
I know it's a busy night for you down there in Phoenix. KTAR news reporter Colton Krolak, thanks for joining us. I hope we can check that. Oh,
Can I sneak in one more question real quick?
Absolutely.
I want a quick update on the Senate race down there in Arizona. Also an interesting one in terms of how that will play out and how that down ballot looks. We know the top of the ticket is within 0.2%. What is the scuttle and what is the feeling there in terms of that all-important Senate race?
Yeah, I think there's been some somewhat surprising that it is as close in the presidential race, and then the Senate race seems to be, kind of a big gap between the two candidates right now. I think it's going to be something that's really interesting over the coming days, how close that race does get. But for right now, it seems like it's not nearly as close as the presidential race.
Thanks a lot down in Phoenix. Colton Krolak from KTAR News. We appreciate it. And speaking of the Senate, we have results, Boyd.
Big breaking news. Coming out of Ohio, the race has been called for the challenger, Bernie Moreno, a Republican, upending Sherrod Brown, who's been in the Senate for a bit there for the Democrats. Again, that could be very interesting in terms of that all-important. Do we have divided government? Who has control of the Senate? Who has control of the House? This is a big one.
So this also brings up a question for me, Boyd. Is this indicative of the mood of the night, right? Like we focus and will continue to focus on election results, but sometimes you start to see a sentiment of the electorate that coming through. This is a huge upset for the Republican Party to take the seat in Ohio. Is this indicative of things to come? Does it look like it's leaning red, a red wave tonight?
So it is interesting. Obviously, Ohio used to be part of that famous blue wall for
That's
the
right.
Democrats, and it has leaned Republican for the last several presidential cycles. And so you still had the senators holding on, but now it appears that Bernie Moreno is going to be the winner there. That's the projection that he will upend, and that would give the Republicans up to 48 confirmed in terms of what that projection looks like. it looks like it could be a good night for the Republicans in the Senate and changing the balance of power.
I am not going to jump out, but I am. Donald Trump is holding the lead in the Senate. It is looking like, with this upset, that the Republicans will have control. Where do we stand in the House?
We are a long way on the House front because those are all the interesting thing about House races is there's never good polling on House races because they're so small. It's so expensive to try to poll in a congressional district. So we don't have a lot of good trends to look at. But I think the odds are still slightly in favor of the Democrats when it comes to controlling the House.
Yeah, the race is called so far, and that's important. That does not mean how the night's going to go. 152 seats held by Republicans, 98 seats held by Democrats. Remember, the number each party's trying to get to is 218 for control. We don't know how it's going to end up, but that's where it is now.
Because we're heading west now.
Yes.
We're going to be getting results from California, from Oregon, from the state of Washington, and those are places that you have tremendous numbers of Democratic strongholds.
That's right. That's where the Democrats are looking to build their wall, so to speak, for the House is going to be built out west. And as you mentioned, it's going to be Oregon, it's going to be Washington and California, even Colorado, where they've typically done well there in those House races. And so as we look at how that breaks down, a lot of those are going to take a little longer to get some of that in. But again, that will be very interesting if we see a flipping of both the House and the Senate. I'm trying to think of a time when we had that,
When
Maura.
we had that. You know, oh, goodness, I recalled this. It's been so many years since this happened. And then it becomes very interesting in terms of the relationship with the president. The one interesting note with the president as well is if you have Kamala Harris, you have someone who used to be in the body. So sometimes that bodes well. Most of the time that bodes well because they know and respect to some degree the system. But, you know, then you have Donald Trump, who has a larger-than-life presence and has been known to be pretty aggressive about his colleagues in those bodies. So it's an interesting question about not only if it's divided again, but what kind of president will interact with them.
You're listening to special election coverage on KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City.
Your voice, your vote, 2024.
You have a choice to keep Utah values.
We can do so much better than we have.
On Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out.
Are we ready to do this? We're ready to get out the vote?
This is special election night coverage on KSL News Radio. Here are Jeff Caplan, Boyd Matheson, and Maura Carabello on KSL News Radio.
Let's turn the focus back to local, where we've had some problems in places like Payson, where they ran out of printer ink. People were waiting for their opportunity to vote. KSL News Radio's Hugo Ricard-Bell is joining us live from Utah County. Hugo, what's the latest there?
So, Jeff, I'm actually right here at the Payson polling station, and when I arrived only about 5 minutes ago, I actually found they were all packing up and everything was resolved. They realized they were running too low on ink about 20 minutes before they did, and they called Utah County immediately, and there were around 70 people in the booth waiting to vote lined up. Poll manager for Payson City, Tiffany Harding, just told me it was tense for a moment.
We were a little bit nervous, right? It's like we have one poll manager is wearing half of the toner because we were trying to move toner from one of the printers to the other one, just to do whatever we could to be expeditious with the voters.
And Jeff, just following the theme of the day in Utah County, it was yet another big turnout here in Payson as well. And when the ink rang out, Tiffany did assure me that no one was turned away. So I can say voting has wrapped up here in Payson City. And Tiffany did also tell me that thanks to the fast work of her polling managers, a crisis was averted. Reporting live from Payson City, Hugo Ricard-Bell, KSL News Radio.
You know, I should point out for Box Elder County, there was one listener who reached to us and said, there was no line when I went tonight. I just went, I voted, I left. Da-dum, right? Boyd Matheson is with us, Maura Carabello. And Maura, what are you looking at right now?
So I have shifted again back to national politics. Right now, the map is looking like 214 Electoral College for Donald Trump 179 for Kamala Harris. Remember, the magic number is 270 that we're trying to get to. But we just got some granular data from AP. It falls in line with what we've been hearing for a while, which is there was a slight shift in data, and it looks like with the election results that the AP uses a data center called VoteCast. And they're saying that there's a slight less movement of Black and Latino voters towards Democrats or Harris, slight move towards Donald Trump. I'll put that in perspective.
Slight move from when?
So from the 2020 election.
Okay.
So Biden had about 9 in 10 Black voters, and it looks like Harris is slated to get 8 in 10 Black voters, and the same with Hispanic voters. Harris is looking to get 6 in 10, and Biden got slightly more than that. And those seem to have not stopped voting. Those seem to have moved to Trump. So we heard early signs of this. I mean, I don't want to oversize it in that if you look at those numbers, 8 and 10, the vast majority of Black voters are still voting Democratic. But on an election night, Jeff, where we're talking about sometimes the decimal point being the difference maker, we see these shifts from traditional Democratic votes right now. According to the AP, these shifts are looking like they are moving towards Donald Trump.
This is certainly enough to make the difference if this holds through the night. I'm looking at Pennsylvania, and I'm wondering, are we replaying 2020? Donald Trump is holding a lead in Pennsylvania of about 3 percentage points. That's with 70% of the vote counted. But as we'd mentioned, in Pennsylvania, mail-in ballots aren't tallied until after the election is closed.
That's right.
So they're beginning to count those, and when they come in over the next few days, maybe even toward this weekend, could they, if they lean Democratic, you're going to hear the same charges from the Trump campaign as last time around.
Yeah, and he's already set us up for that, right? He's already started to put it out there that he's questioning those, and he's looking for an election that's free. We just got, interestingly, 1 percentage point more of the vote, and it spread it a little more. Right now, if you're looking at Pennsylvania, 70% of the vote is in, 51.1% for Donald Trump, 47.9% for Kamala Harris. But like you said, it's so important to understand with Pennsylvania when they vote what. So early votes, which are often passionate, decided voters, sent their ballots in early. They have not started counting those. Let's look at the other key states that may make the difference for Kamala Harris, because as things are looking right now, it's Donald Trump game. You're looking at results in Michigan right now. They are 51.5% for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is at 46.8 with with 28% of the vote in, so not so much. 61% of the vote in Wisconsin. Donald Trump's holding a 2-point lead in that instance. And then Minnesota, the other state that Kamala Harris needs to really perform well in, 12% of the vote, so just barely starting. 60% for Donald Trump, 37% for Kamala Harris. So too early to call all of those states that were the most likely path to victory for Kamala Harris. What we do see on the board, though, is the states that would have helped her in Georgia and North Carolina. They still haven't been called, but right now they're looking pretty red.
The big picture, the Electoral College right now, 214 for Trump, 179 for Kamala Harris. I don't want to do the math right now. What is that? 21, 35 electoral votes between them at this point.
Right.
270, of course, the magic number. So it's been climbing upward through the evening, but the thing I keep obsessing about is that dang needle.
Yeah.
The New York Times needle, which supposedly provides an accurate projection of who is most likely to win this election, and right now it is leaning 88% toward a Donald Trump victory.
Yeah, now remember, the needle is not a predictor. The needle is taking a bunch of scenarios, though, and saying, okay, with the states that we've seen come in, and Jeff, what you and I have watched throughout the night is this needle started out almost straight up and down, and then it scooched a little bit towards Donald Trump and more. If you were to look at the needle as you and I are right now, it is showing 301 electoral college estimates for Donald Trump. That would be 30 electoral college members above what he needed. The chance of winning right now, they have moved Donald Trump into what they're calling a likely zone. Now, it is of the states that they're looking at. They're saying Arizona right now is leaning Trump. Georgia, very likely Trump. Michigan, leaning Trump. North Carolina, very likely Trump. Pennsylvania, leaning Trump. Wisconsin, leaning Trump. That's, again, New York Times needle on tracking swing states and what they're seeing at this moment in time.
You know what we should mention when we said Kamala Harris now at 179, 214 Trump to 179 for Harris. They've called California and they've called Washington, and those are included.
That's right. And those were big gets for her. Those were expected. They have not called Oregon yet. That's still sitting out there to be called. Other Western states. But as one suspects, Colorado has been called for Kamala. The coast is likely to go for the Democrats as well. Arizona, for those who are watching our neighbors to the south, still too close to call.
Also, Nevada, they haven't counted a single vote yet.
They're not in, yeah.
So is it a possibility with the needle? Again, I'm obsessing about the needle, leaning at 88% Trump. Could this end tonight?
Yeah, it always could. I still suspect it won't. I still suspect that these northeastern states, the Steel Belt, I think they will be slow in coming in. Georgia's going to be, slow. Well, they count quickly, but I think we're still going to not know. But I will say, Jeff, this points to knowing in the next couple of days, right? This does not so far look like it will be weeks and weeks before we have a winner.
So we don't have to wait at least till wasn't it Saturday last time around?
Right. Yeah,
that's Saturday morning they made the announcement, Arizona.
Yeah, and I remember this feeling. Boyd Matheson and I were actually together in 2016 watching the results come in. And I don't know if you all recall, every predictor had predicted Hillary Clinton to win that night and not Donald Trump. And I'm going to say about this time, we looked at the clock and it had really tilted. And you knew at that time Hillary Clinton's campaign stopped taking interviews, and you could just feel the momentum. And you're looking at the board, and it shifted to Donald Trump about this time in the evening.
Now, Kamala Harris had said previously that she would be speaking tonight. We certainly expect that Donald Trump will declare victory because pretty much his aides have said he's going to declare victory.
Right. And he's declaring it as a campaign tactic, which is a little fascinating because there was some discussion post-analysis of that being a strategy that if you declare victory, that gives you the foothold into some lawsuits if it doesn't go the way that you want it to go. So you have to wonder if that's a victory. He's gathered a big party at Mar-a-Lago at his resort, and that tonight we know includes Senator Mike Lee will be there and is there. So it will be interesting to see if Donald Trump has a tactic of calling the election for himself as a means to set the foundation. If he calls it, Jeff, then we took something away from him, right? It'll appear that way instead of waiting for the results to come in.
All right, we'll see how these strategies play out. Meantime, let's look at the big picture. Let's go live to the election desk in KSL News Radio's Becky Bruce.
Jeff, Washington and California's Electoral College votes will go for Vice President Kamala Harris. That is a big jump toward narrowing the gap between her and former President Donald Trump. He currently sits at 214 Electoral College votes to 179 for Harris. Again, though, we are still waiting for all 7 of our battleground states and their 93 votes to be decided. It looks like Texas Senator Ted Cruz will stay in office at this hour. That's according to a projection from CNN. At this hour, the Associated Press has not officially called that race, but ABC News has Senator Cruz with a solid 10% lead over his closest challenger. The question, of course, is whether the Republicans can take control of the Senate from the Democrats. Right now, there are still 13 more Senate races to be called. Republicans hold a lead, 48 seats to 39 so far. At the KSL Elections Desk, I'm Becky Bruce.
Thanks a lot, Becky. KSL News Radio's Britt Johnson is at the Weber County Fairgrounds where voting continues an hour and 12 minutes past the end of the election. It stopped at 8 o'clock, but if you are in line to vote, you get to vote, and they're still voting. What's going on, Britt?
I can see the end of the line right now, Jeff, so it should be wrapping up, I think, within the next half hour. But things are still really exciting here. A woman just had a seizure in line. Officials quickly set up a perimeter. There were medically trained poll workers that attended her, but she still wanted to vote. So they got her in a wheelchair, took her over to vote, and then she had her family take her home to rest. So people are dedicated. They're waiting hours in line in the snow to vote, having medical issues, and then still voting.
This in a state where they already called the presidential race, where they already called the Senate race for John Curtis. A woman has a seizure, and she still wants to vote. Britt, that is a terrible way to cut the line. Seriously.
Yeah, I don't know if it was intentional or not. No, I'm just teasing.
But she's okay.
Yeah,
she's okay.
Yes, she's okay. She was able to go home with her family. But it's interesting because the Weber County auditor and clerk, he thinks that 90% of the people here are here to vote for president. And I wonder if it's, where it was called early in Utah already, if this is more just down to a principle item. They want to say they voted, they had their voice heard. I really do feel like I feel like it's a deep down, a rooted principle issue and them being a good citizen.
I think there's an emotional component to it with this election, that people after the race is called are willing to stand in line, have seizures, and still vote. An amazing story from the Weber County Fairgrounds. Thanks a lot, Britt Johnson.
And I totally relate to that. I mean, it does not work for my schedule anymore to vote on Election Day. But, Jeff, I miss it. I miss that sort of moment in time. It's like a good sporting event. It's a moment where we're all gathered doing the same thing at the same time. I'm obliged at this point to point out that there must be someone still standing in line that cares about their local elections.
And on the other hand, I've voted in every election since I turned, I think, 18 years old, was it? And I have never stood in a line longer than 4 people.
Really?
Really?
Never. So I've been... I've been maybe in an hour line or a 45-minute line.
Yeah, but I want to point out, there's never been a case where the line was longer than 4 people and I walked away.
That's right.
It was always a short line.
You never staged a medical event, is what you're saying.
They took care of business, and I'm surprised by all of this. Let's go to KSL News Radio's Eric Cabrera. He's been in Lehigh this evening following the Alpine School District vote, but also noticing these long lines. Eric, what's going on?
Jeff, so I've actually made my way over to Saratoga Springs now at their polling location here. The good news is everyone has gone inside now. The line has gotten short enough to where everyone is inside. It's actually in a church building here, and it's inside the gym where everyone is placing their votes. And so the last group of people are making their votes right now. Here it's Proposition 14 that would cause the split from Alpine School District if voters push them through. Voters like the last ones, like I said, behind me still in line. I also caught up with Saratoga Springs City Council member Chris Karn, who shared what happens next if Proposition 14 goes the distance.
The next steps would be to elect a new school board. The new school board would be elected in the November of 25 election cycle, and that new school board essentially takes responsibility of the new school district, which wouldn't start until July 1st of 2027.
Whichever way things shake out, Utahns are out here staying in line to make that choice. Reporting live from Saratoga Springs, Eric Cabrera, KSL News Radio.
So, Eric, the lines are beginning to die down. They're getting to the end of it at this point?
Yeah, it looks like it. Finally, everyone, like I said, is inside the gym where you can cast your vote. It looks like about maybe 30 people left in there. So, yeah, things are wrapping up over here.
And I totally agree that this is a hot issue for Utah County. It's maybe even why in many of these polling locations we're seeing turnout. I know that here on KSL News Radio, we interviewed both sides of this issue. And as you've pointed out well, it's not only one proposal about Alpine School District, it's 2. Depending on where you live, you're either voting for 11 or 14. And we even interviewed both members of school boards who were taking different sides of the issue. So it makes sense that the lines are long and the topic is hot about Alpine School District. So we'll continue to follow that issue. Jeff, I want to pivot a little bit back to national politics because we do have some results coming in that are interesting. This is an interesting just fact to put in your election night trivia. This will be the first time in United States history that the U.S. Senate will have 2 black women serving simultaneously. Lisa Blunt Rochester from Delaware, and Angela also Brooks, who we were talking about earlier, from Maryland. Both are Democrats, and they will be serving simultaneously. So that's a historic moment for America.
So they both won their elections tonight. And I can't grasp the name of the woman, what is it?
Also Brooks. So just the word also and the word Brooks.
Now
also
I'll remember
Brooks. Yes. It's nice. So there you go. There's that moment in history. You know, we've been spending so much time tonight talking, as you hear every single election night, about calling. Who calls, how they call the election, how newsrooms work. Maybe we'll take a minute and peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about how that call is made. So there are 2 or 3 major national outlets nationally, one of whom I'm going to name as Edison Research. Another very common one is called VoteCast, which is affiliated with Chicago NORC. I'm talking about some election firms who have they're not election firms, data firms that do polling and opinion research. And they have a bunch of policy wonks. And stations like ours or others, so CBS, NBC, and ABC, one of our affiliates, they use Edison Research. And they will have folks in their own organization who have an ability to call data as well. That's called the decision desk. And the decision desk will work with these third parties to really number crunch until that individual news outlet is ready to make the call.
Okay, but here's the first question with that. Why do they call Utah with 0% of the votes counted? What data are they looking at?
Well, they're looking at polling data, right? They're looking at not voters. They're looking at polling data, which is, again, Boyd said this earlier, it's really unusual for AP to not be looking at election results when they make the call. Now, if we're just being fully disclosing about Utah, it's hard to not look at opinion predictions, polling predictions, and not sort of say it's probably a fair Las Vegas bet that those are going to come true. So we would say, as a matter of form, a matter of data form, they jumped the gun a little bit in calling this. It's, again, unusual for the AP. Fox News is a little bit of an outlier. They use someone a little different. But I also wanted to mention some of the preparation that newsrooms have done. CNN has hired legal teams for their analysis tonight because they're so sure that there's going to be lawsuits that are waged sometimes. So in addition to the usual political data people, they've also hired legal team members.
Oh, no, lawyers standing over the election desk.
Good news. Lawyers have been added to the election night coverage. AP has more journalists hired just to explain this call. AP hired more journalists. CBS hired 20 more people tonight to do misinformation and fact-checking. And NBC and the New York Times dispatched a fleet of journalists that they never have before into county-level races. So part of it was the hype of the election, but really I think what we're seeing more is the response to the 2020 elections. And you saw news organizations sort of shifting to having more boots on the ground, a stronger focus on getting data. Again, Utah seems to be an exception since they've called us before we have any poll results. But that was a little bit a taste of the preparation that went in tonight from news organizations. I think by and large tonight, they seem to be slightly more judicious than they have in the past about calling election results. Again, we can be the story of the evening in saying they called Utah before a vote was counted. But that's a little sneak behind the curtains when we hear the terms, counting the vote or calling the election. It's a local outlet also working with a third-party data company. The outlet itself will always make the call.
A little bit about how the sausage is made.
A little bit how the sausage is made.
KSL News Radio's Maria Chaleos is out at the state GOP party this evening. You can hear the festivities in the background. Maria, we want to check in. What's going on?
Well, we just heard from Congressman Burgess Owens addressing the crowd once the Associated Press announced that former President Trump did win Utah. And the congressman saying how proud he is to be a representative of Utah and urging the crowd to continue to fight for family values. Now, after he spoke, I asked the congressman what he thought about an ABC poll that said that many voters flock to the polls because they believe that our democracy is at risk.
We cannot have a country that people don't respect and do not believe our system works anymore. I don't know if you now remember growing up, we have a voting process. We wake up the next day, whether we won or lost, we say, okay, well, what do we do now to win the next time? But we had faith in the system. We have lost our faith.
I also asked the congressman what his goal is for his next term, and he says really what his legacy, what he would like it to be, is to help at-risk kids, and he believes if former President Trump is reelected, that he will have a better chance at that, and there will be more innovation for those at-risk kids. We are kind of standing by here to hear from Congressman John Curtis after it was called that he won the Senate. We haven't heard from him yet, but they're expecting to hear from him at any minute.
Thanks a lot, Maria, for the update from the Utah GOP party. Right now in the presidential race, Donald Trump with 230 electoral votes, Kamala Harris with 179, both reaching toward 270. This race continues to remain tight. Tensions are high. We talked with two Utahns, both rooting for different candidates. Let's begin with KSL News Radio's Andy Cupp, who spoke with a Trump supporter.
Utah County Commissioner Amelia Powers Gardner is voting for Donald Trump. She's been working in the private sector for almost 2 decades and started her work as a public servant more than 5 years ago when she was the Utah County Clerk. She says this election cycle, the main thing driving her vote is inflation.
As a mother of 6, it's undeniable that I spend a lot more money on groceries today than I did 4 years ago.
Polling this election shows that a top concern for many Americans is the economy and inflation. Powers Gardner says she's confident Mr. Trump will turn things around, and she says his first presidency is proof.
Between just his pro-business, pro-economic, pro-free market economy really helps, particularly places like Utah where we have so many entrepreneurs. That's very helpful to us. Plus, a peaceful world allows our companies and our people to do business globally, which helps the economy.
She believes the second Trump presidency would also be good for the housing market because there'd be fewer economic regulations leading to more housing supply. Powers Gardner also said that, to her, former President Trump's rhetoric isn't nearly as important as his policies.
It's way more important to have somebody that maybe says mean things but actually gets things done in government than it is to have somebody who says nice things but whose policies make our family life harder and make families suffer.
She says that if Trump loses the election, she will accept the results, but will also prepare for what she predicts will be several more years of a rough economy. Andy Cupp, KSL News Radio.
And now we go to another first-time voter, a Democrat at the University of Utah. Our team coverage continues.
My name is Harleen Saney. I am 20 years old, and I'm currently a student at the University of Utah. I'm getting a bachelor's in health and research, planning on going to pharmacy school.
At 20, this will be Saney's first presidential election, and she's already getting involved in politics. She's worked for months with the Utah Democratic Party, campaigning for local and national races. At the top of her list of concerns, abortion rights.
I'm a very heavy believer in terms of everyone should just have control and autonomy over their own bodies. So I really supported Harris's campaign on giving women and anyone with reproductive organs the ability to choose what they wanted to do with them and just have the safety of getting medical help when they need it.
She also says the cost of higher education and health care are top priorities for her. Saney thinks the things Harris has done as VP are indicative of what's to come in her presidency. And she thinks Harris's attitude will also help her get things done.
But I think as president and as a woman, she'll be able to listen more to the people and be able to take into consideration everyone's concerns more as president. And I think she just has a very amazing attitude towards her campaign. The way that she handles her campaigning, the way that she handles different debates, the way that she handles answering questions towards policies, everything, the attitude that she has really makes me confident that she'll be able to listen to people and come from a place of love for the community.
Saney says if Trump won, she'd be disappointed, but there will always be Democrats in office that she knows she can trust. Jessica Lowell, KSL News Radio.
So you heard two perspectives. Now you'll hear about a few states in Pennsylvania. At this point, 77% of the votes in Donald Trump, leading by 3 points, but they don't count the mail-in ballots. till tonight. That's when they're beginning, and this will stretch for days there. In Michigan, Donald Trump is leading by 6 points. Only a third of the votes are in Wisconsin. Trump leading by 3 in Wisconsin, 68%, about 2/3 of the votes are in. Lastly, in Arizona, Donald Trump holding a 0.2% lead with half the votes counted.
Long way to go in all of those. We keep seeing they just keep narrowing and narrowing, whether it's somewhere like Pennsylvania where it appears that the vice president will continue to kind of chip away at that lead. Many people kind of thought this would be a reverse flip, that it would be the Harris campaign running out to a bit of an early lead and then former President Trump having to chip away at it. But anyway, it all depends on where the ballots come in from, who gets counting first and who counts fast. And currently, all of these are just razor thin on the margins. None of these are getting close to being called. We should note that, again, North Carolina has been called for former President Trump. So they've got that one in line, and the former president has won that one. Georgia, I think, will be called any moment now. I'm expecting that one to be called because the former president continues to run 3+ percentage points ahead. And they're looking at over 91% of the ballots are in there in Georgia. Again, if they're all Atlanta, it could shift. But again, they're getting down to those small things where you start looking county by county, precinct by precinct, where are the votes left? And that's how things start to stack up.
So let's move to a category of race that is starting to shape up for the night, and that is state governors. Many of our governors this year were up for re-election or election, as the case may be. And let's go through where we are right now. Right now, there are 26 Republicans who will lead their state government and 22 Democrats. Interestingly enough, this is all from AP. AP is telling us that there are 2 races that they have not called yet tonight. One of those races, interestingly, is the great state of Utah, which we find, I think, maybe right. I'm looking at Jeff's face right now.
What?
AP has called the presidential race for Utah. They have called the U.S. Senate race for Utah, but they have not yet called the governor's race for Utah.
Get them on the phone. What's going on?
The other state that they have not called yet is Washington State, and it's leaning Democratic. Yep. And looks like while we were talking, of course, they came through and they called it for Bob Ferguson, who is the candidate. 56% of the vote is going to him. He is the candidate for governor. So as of this moment in time, if you are following AP, Utah's governor's race is the only race that has not been called.
What's going on there? No, seriously, what is going on there?
So we were talking earlier about the fact that they would call something like the Senate race based on a lot of the polling, a lot of the historics and all of that. I think the thing that's holding AP back on this one, and I still believe it was poor form on AP to call the Senate race 90 seconds after the polls were supposed to close, even though not all the votes had been cast and nothing had been counted yet. That's an issue. But they didn't call the governor's race because I think it's likely that it will be less than 50%. Again, in a 3-way race, including the write-in candidate, it's quite possible that Governor Cox could win this race but be well under that 50% mark. And I think AP would hesitate in their modeling to say, we're not going to call a race that we are not certain they're going to be over 50%.
Again, they are just looking at raw data. They're not necessarily bringing in the local nuances of understanding. So it looks like, though, let us make the call and say that we think Spencer Cox is going to win the governor's race. That would finish the evening for America with 27 Republican governors and 23 Democratic governors.
Could we go back to Governor Cox? How is it that he doesn't get to 50%? The last poll I heard, Phil Lyman was at about 5%. The governor was far in the lead. Did I hear bad numbers?
No. I mean, this is an interesting night. He very well may get to the low 50s. But he has several third-party challengers, all of whom are conservative challengers. And so the most notable was someone who ran with him in the primary, Phil Lyman, who later on declared a write-in campaign. The polling numbers that we have seen, again, these are not actuals. The predictors were that Phil Lyman tonight will get anywhere between 3% of the vote, and we did actually see a poll in the last 5 days in which he was up to almost 15% of the vote. If Phil Lyman and the 2 or 3 other third-party challengers were able to cobble together that kind of percentage, it would bring Governor Spencer Cox's numbers below the 50% line.
Yeah. So I think, again, not going to determine the outcome, not going
Right.
to change the outcome in any way, shape, or form. But when you do have that third or several additional party candidates or
that would be
write-in
third,
candidates,
fourth, and fifth party
third, fourth, and fifth,
candidates,
yeah,
right.
they're all out there. And if they each take a percentage or two, then that starts to add up, especially if they're all from one wing of the political spectrum as they are in this case.
Yeah, I love the perspective earlier, too. Remember, we saw this in the 90s in Utah when Mike Leavitt was running, and he had Merrill Cook, who was an infamous challenger. Merrill Cook, as we recall, was our member of Congress. He was a Republican, got disenfranchised, and later ran a few times as an independent. And Merrill Cook at the time, in 92, Governor Leavitt won, but he won with 42% of the total vote that night, Jeff, and Merrill Cook came in with 33%. How the story goes, though, is Mike Leavitt stood for re-election 4 years later, and he got 75% of the vote. So I bring that up because it brings up the question of, well, what does it mean when your Republican governor gets under 50? And in Mike Leavitt's case, it meant that the Republican Party was having a discussion about what it means to be a Republican, and you then saw a very successful governor stand for re-election with 75% of the vote.
So are we having a similar discussion at this point in time?
I think you have to say we are, right? Yeah. I mean, we would express it not by the Tea Party. We wouldn't express it by other indicators. We're looking at labels like MAGA, and we're looking at labels, and those are definers of what it means to be a conservative. And what's intriguing about this discussion among conservatives is the issues that they're prioritizing.
Yeah, and it's always about what you prioritize in terms of that. And I think if we go again back to the Governor Leavitt example, he governed, and he actually governed. It wasn't about performative politics. It wasn't about show horse stuff. It was about governing and doing the hard stuff that made a difference and really set the state on a path that really carried some momentum for a lot of years to come. And so when he stood for re-election, it was a no-brainer. It was 75% because the discussion had been had, and it came down to principle and policy, and that proved out, and everybody lined up behind that and ushered in a new season.
And that'll be the test for Governor Cox as well, how quickly he can point to an agenda and start to coalesce people around policy. But a really important asterisk, that will need to happen in the era of social media.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference.
You know, you raised a point about third, fourth, fifth party candidates splitting the vote. I haven't heard a word about these minor candidates who were running for president. I mean, there were spoilers like, what's her name, Jill Stein, and others who were on the ballot. Here in Utah, we had Satan or Lucifer, whatever his name is. I guess we'll see if he gets any votes coming up after 10 o'clock when they release the first tranche tonight. Have we heard anything about these third-party candidates, fourth-party candidates, independents running for president this year? Is anybody pulling a point away?
Hey, my independent polling and my own text line and the email and the text line here at KSL, I think I have broken 100 votes for president.
Oh, wait,
this year.
that's right. They do this every time you get votes.
Congratulations.
So I think I've made the century mark. So that's a new high water mark.
So you've got about 263 more years before you're
Before I
elected
can
as
get it,
president.
yeah.
Congratulations. Well done. You know, we didn't hear, I don't think as of late, one intriguing thing that happened in this election cycle was, of course, Kennedy. And he was making a surge. He qualified to get on Utah's ballot rather quickly.
Yeah.
He used an example of Utah to say how viable he was. He was gaining momentum. There was a moment in time in the 2024 presidential election when Kennedy was in the 30s in terms of polling, which is unheard of for a third party. And then, as we all know well, he shifted what he was doing. He's thrown all of his support behind Donald Trump. Boyd, I think he is still probably technically on the ballot in a couple of states. But really, you did not see an emergence of a successful alternative voice beyond the Republican and the
Yeah,
Democrat.
it was interesting early on, Jeff, to bring that all full circle. There was a lot of chatter early on of, is this the year? Is this the year for a Joe Manchin or someone that could have really gotten some weight behind an independent kind of movement? And Kennedy seemed to have a little bit of that, and then it faded, and then he actually ended up in lawsuits to get his name taken off the ballot. Now, he spent tens of millions of dollars trying to get on the ballot in a lot of these states. And that's an interesting discussion because it is so hard and so expensive. He was in lawsuits with the Democratic Party. He was in lawsuits with the Republican Party in all these different states who didn't want him on the ballot for their particular reason, whether it was the Harris campaign or the Trump campaign. And so that's an interesting thing because I think there is going to be a moment for a third-party candidate, but ballot access is a big deal that we haven't really reckoned with here in the country because it is so difficult to get on the ballot.
Now, where this could percolate is, starting in the 90s, there's a political strategy that says if you want something to be adopted at a national level, start at a state level and percolate it up and percolate it up and percolate it up. And I will say, while I don't think third-party candidates in Utah are going to win the day, I do think their presence on the ballot was felt as in a way we never have. I think the easiest way to see that is in many of our debates in this cycle for Utah races, you saw more than two candidates standing on those platforms, and you saw particularly the Libertarian and the United Utah Party gaining enough traction to at least get on the debate stage. Now, are they going to win? No. But I would watch third-party races in state to see if they're getting in the teens and 20s and see at that point a national conversation could percolate about a real challenger at a national level.
And joining us on KSL News Radio right now, one of your cohorts on KSL at night, political consultant Taylor Morgan is joining us. So what do you make of this evening, Taylor?
Well, Jeff, Maura, Boyd, great to be with you. I am coming to you from the Utah or the Salt Lake County and the Utah Republican Party watch event at Siempre Event Center in Draper, Utah. Folks have been watching the national results come in, the presidential results coming in. Of course, we are still waiting on anything from Utah. Right now, we are hearing on stage from select Republican candidates such as Derek Brown and others who are filling some time while we continue to wait for results.
Okay, so Taylor, tell us something about this. John Curtis spoke in Provo at a different location, and they didn't show his victory speech on the screen there at the state GOP party?
They didn't at first, Jeff, but they actually did show that video. I assume that was a recording of Curtis's speech from earlier. They did show that on the screen about an hour ago here at the Republican event.
What else are you hearing? What's the other chatter? What's the general mood there, Taylor, as you've kind of watched this night play out? We obviously still have a whole lot of unknowns when it comes to the national race, the presidential race. What's the general feel? What's the chatter, and what are your sources telling you tonight?
Well, yeah, Boyd, I think that everyone here is cautiously optimistic about what they are seeing so far when it comes to national results. Really, here in Utah, we don't have any competitive races statewide. I think it's safe to say that the races for governor and the races for U.S. Congress are all pretty much locked in. Jeff referenced to John Curtis. In fact, the Curtis race was a national press before any actual results have come out. So that was interesting. Really, I think, Boyd, what everybody here is really paying attention to are some of the hotly contested down ballot races, specifically some races in Salt Lake County where Republicans are hoping to pick up a few more seats in the state legislature. Also, county-wide issues in Salt Lake County. People are eager to see what happens with a public safety bond, with the ZAP tax, with the county mayor's race, and, of course, with the race for city council. So there's a lot of tight races. People seem to be a little bit frustrated that Utah hasn't released any results yet. So hopefully we have those sooner than later.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating to see how that all plays out. In the other sense, Jeff alluded to the fact that you have all of these different parties going on. The Curtis campaign down in Provo, Celeste Malloy at a different location, the governor hanging out at the mansion for the moment. I'm one of those who thinks this might lead to better election night speeches, less red meat, less applause lines that are predictable and could be said in any Republican watch party anywhere in the country. Are we getting to a pivot to governing? What's the sense there? And is this a good thing, or does this feel like a more fractured party as a result?
Yeah, it's a great question, Boyd. It is really interesting that the Utah Republicans are celebrating tonight from different locations the way they are. Of course, the governor's mansion, the governor's there due to security concerns, is my understanding. A few legislators that are Republicans have been going back and forth, driving all the way downtown to the governor's mansion, coming back to this event in Draper. So it's interesting, Boyd. I think we might get some more thoughtful speeches and responses from candidates. However, we are definitely dealing with worse refreshments. We are out of brownies here. We have nothing left but water. So that's a problem, and that's probably my number one concern right now.
That's the same problem they had with the printer ink down in Payson. Seriously.
You may want to go down to the Curtis campaign. They've got J-Dogs and Swig and chip cookies and a host of other things. You should be heading south. Maybe your better bet.
I am out of here.
Taylor Morgan, good to talk to you. Have a nice evening celebrating with the Republicans, okay?
Thanks, guys. Have a great show.
KSL News Radio is what you're listening to. This is our special election coverage. Deidre Henderson posted on X at about 9:30 that there are 22 counties that are now finished up. Geography majors, how many counties are there in Utah?
29.
Okay, so we have 7 still to go.
Each one has a Lincoln Day dinner or a...
That's exactly right.
So what else are we going to look at now? There's certainly enough going on. The Senate races, I'm seeing John Tester in Montana. This was supposed to be a key race. 13% of the vote in Montana. Tim Sheehy is leading him by 16% at this point. It's early.
It's early, and my guess is that gap will close pretty well as that night goes on. But currently, you've actually got the Republicans. They have secured 50 seats in the United States Senate. So that means even if they don't win another seat on the night, if the former president becomes the president, they would have the tie-breaking vote with the vice president. They would be in control of the Senate. My guess is they will probably pick up a couple of more, so it'll be a good night for Republicans in the Senate. But as we've been talking about, the House seems to be tipping just a little shade of blue. So we may have a double flip night, which is pretty unprecedented, very, very rare.
And there's 9 seats left to be called in the Senate, and there's 143 seats left to be called in the House. So a long way to go in the House, as we would expect at this point in the evening. But the Senate, as Boyd said, it's already a 50 folks are going to be Republicans coming in. 9 are still waiting to be called.
So it's a long way to go in the U.S. House, but it's a short way to go to the election desk. Let's go live to KSL News Radio's Becky Bruce.
Jeff, 25 Electoral College votes are what's needed now. That's what separates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump needs just 40 more to reach the minimum he needs to win the presidency. Within the last few minutes here, the Associated Press calling Virginia for Harris and North Carolina for Trump. But let's look at what's still left, because there's more than enough for either side to gain some ground here. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Those are all battleground states. Those are all still up in the air as of this moment. And there's still a few states that are not so much battleground states that are also up in the air. New Hampshire, parts of Maine, and of course Alaska and Hawaii are still out there, plus parts of Nebraska as well. Celebrating his re-election in Louisiana, the House Speaker Mike Johnson said, whoever wins, he wants us all to be thinking of them. And that's not the sound I need, but he basically said the president, whoever wins, he wants us all to keep that person in our prayers. A call for unity there from the House Speaker of the United States as we come down to the wire here on the Electoral College count. At the elections desk, I'm Becky Bruce.
KSL News Radio special election coverage. Jeff Caplan, Boyd Matheson, Maura Carabello. And at this moment, the electoral vote count, I'm seeing different things on different screens from television, from the New York Times, from KSL. Can somebody tell me reliably where we stand at this moment?
Well, if we look at the AP report, right now Donald Trump has 230. Kamala Harris has 205. Remember, we're trying to get to 270. North Carolina, which has been in flux for a while, appears to be called officially for Donald Trump. Just over the line here, 50.8% for Donald Trump, 48% for Kamala Harris. Georgia, Trump has about a 3 percentage point lead, but it has not been called yet. Let's move over to those car states for us, those Rust Belt states. We've got Minnesota now is 51% of the vote in, and Kamala Harris has a 53.5% lead. Wisconsin is a slight edge, almost 3 percentage points for Donald Trump at this moment, and that's with 70% of the voters in, 40% in Michigan, and we're looking at 41.5% for Donald Trump, 46.8% for Kamala Harris. Still too close to call in all three of those races.
Yeah, one of the interesting numbers there that Mara just shared, Wisconsin, this is a state, again, real crucial to the Kamala Harris campaign, and 70% of the vote is in now, and a 2.4 percentage point lead for former President Trump. I think that's a little unexpected at this stage. I would have expected Kamala Harris to have caught former President Trump by this point and be kind of edging her way forward in Wisconsin. But this was one of those late breakers that suddenly kind of got put back into play. Most people thought the Harris campaign kind of had Wisconsin secured until they didn't. And so things have shifted there a little bit.
Well, let me ask you, is it conceivable that Kamala Harris can pull up and pull ahead in Wisconsin with 70% of the vote counted? Is there still room to gain those 3 points?
There's still definitely a path. And as long as there's a path, that's one of the things. I spent some time with the AP folks going through how they do this. They have thousands and thousands of people that are looking at all of this data, and they're looking at all the historics, and it is an incredible thing. Their batting average is unbelievable. It's mind-boggling. It's so good. And so they're not going to call it, although they did call the Utah race without any votes in, so that's a
but I don't think we'll prove them wrong.
They'll still be right.
It was bad form, but we will prove them wrong. Kamala Harris is holding down the single seat she needs to in Nebraska still, so she's holding on to that. That means she won't lose by the 1 point. She still may lose by more, but we still are looking at Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And depending on how those goes, she could remedy what looks like her fate right now.
Yeah, and so back to your question, Jeff, in terms of what are the paths, even in a place like Wisconsin. And so if you get into kind of the bubbles of it all, you start going to, okay, where out of that 30% of the vote that hasn't been counted in Wisconsin.
Now, you've taught me this is what losing candidates do in the back room before they have to come out and concede, right?
No, and actually I have been in those war rooms when you can go through and you may be losing. I literally remember an election night where the candidate was down by several points with only about 7% of the vote left to count, and we declared victory because we knew where those votes were. And that's how detailed and how granular this has become in terms of a science. And so as you look around the state of Wisconsin, there's still plenty of space for the Harris campaign to not just make up the 3 points, they could even add to it because of where they're coming.
Perhaps that it's Milwaukee where the votes haven't come in yet, something like that.
I'm going to give another snapshot of this. Of those of you geeks who follow 538 or Nate Silver, he ran 1,000 simulations. So unique simulations, he ran 1,000 of them. Harris won 503 of them. Donald Trump won 492 of them, and 2 of them had no winners at all. He then profoundly declares that Harris wins 50 times out of 100, and Trump wins 49 times out of 100. that was his last analysis going into election night.
Okay, we're going to go live to Congressman Blake Moore offering his victory speech
So
now.
strong.
Let's listen on KSL.
And, I think the story to tell when you look at you look at the presidential race as well as the Senate races right now, where they stand now at what is it, almost 9:30 or so Mountain Time. You see a macro trend right now saying, hey, we're not pleased with the current administration and we want to go a different direction. So I think that's the big story to kind of keep watching unfold, and we'll go from there. The House is we knew it was going to be close. To get a majority in the House and to maintain the majority, it basically goes through more of the Democrat or blue states. And so that's going to be a long night. We probably won't know this evening, but there's some seats that look tough. There's some seats that look like pickups, and it'll just go back and forth for a little while.
The big story tonight is, of course, the long lines and vote totals that are delayed, even partial vote releases being delayed tonight. What does this say about the planning for elections here in Utah and the way that we do it?
So you have a lot of options to vote early, and it's done in a way that we shouldn't be running into these problems. I think there was several issues with not having enough paper and even ink toner, and that can't happen. So we've got to do better than that. But that's why I think we're all still waiting for the results in Utah.
Where do you think the breakdown is? Is it with the lieutenant governor? Is it with the county clerks? Is it with individual county clerks?
I don't know much about the specifics of this one, actually. I haven't heard many issues going on in the 1st District, so it hasn't really been brought to my attention. So.
If you end up in a divided Congress with a divided president, the margins will be very narrow regardless,
right?
How does that change how you work across the aisle, how you get things passed to benefit the state of Utah?
I'm still hopeful that as it looks right now, if you have, the only way this is a divided government, I think, is with the Ohio seat already called. Montana is very likely to go Republican, and with West Virginia, you already have a pretty strong majority in the Senate, possibly 55 senators, which is a significantly positive win for Republicans across the country tonight. So it all comes down to the House, and like I said, it's going to be very narrow. We've been in split government in the last 2 years, and there's a lot of there's a lot of tough decisions to make. There's a lot of gridlock. There are a lot of good reasons. We were trying to put the clamp on President Biden's ability to spend over the last. In his first 2 years, he spent nearly $5 trillion net new dollars. It created the worst inflation we've seen, at least in my lifetime. And the American people, I think, are speaking out tonight that they don't want to continue to go in that direction. So hopefully we keep the House. And there's a lot of good races out there that look like they're going to flip in the Republicans' favor. It's way too early to tell. If it is split government, we'll tackle that when we get there. But I think having the White House in Republican control will help deal with a lot of the immigration problems that we've seen from the current administration. A lot of the regulatory burden that gets put on Americans. I think you release a little bit of that, and having the Senate helps actually move legislation. It would have been great to have the Senate the last couple of years. I'm hopeful to be in a majority so we can really get some things done.
He was a big spender as well.
To supporters and voters tonight, more generally on this night?
So always just really grateful. People always ask, this isn't an easy gig, right? Being in this environment, politics can be very toxic, but you have to find a way to be productive. And I hope that the 1st District residents know that I'm doing my very best to be as productive as possible in a crazy environment. And I'm just very appreciative. We don't know anything about my race yet, though, so I can't really speak to it too much.
Well, say you get reelected and say Congress and the White House goes to Republican. What are you going to do to lead out on the national debt?
So thank you, because that's my biggest issue. We have an opportunity. When you have the White House, House, and Senate under one-party control, you can pass a bill once a year. And we have to be willing to go after our major deficits. And we've passed out of the committee that I'm on, in the Budget Committee, with a very narrow majority.
You're listening to Congressman Blake Moore on KSL News Radio. We're awaiting results of his election race. He's speaking to reporters now at the governor's mansion.
Move it through the House, move it through the Senate, get the president to sign it. That puts us on a better path than we're on right now. But we use this budget reconciliation process in our favor to be able to go after deficits. And we've got to be willing to have the political will to do it. We've also got taxes to deal with. And those two work hand in hand. We've got to grow the economy and have good, positive pro-growth tax policy. And we've seen a lot of that, and we've seen our revenues increase, but we've got to go after some of our major spending issues. And there's low-hanging fruit, too. That's the part that I keep wanting to reiterate to people. Improper payments are actually a bipartisan issue, and they're in the hundreds of billions of dollars. We go after stuff like that and find other areas to just find that wasteful spending that exists. I would use this majority, the trifecta, if you will, to do that. And hopefully we maintain the House and we have an opportunity to at least try.
To Representative Blake Moore there for Congressional District 1. He's at the governor's mansion where we've got the governor and a few other of our GOP party who will be coming out and speaking throughout the...
All right, you've been listening to Congressman Blake Moore live on KSL News Radio. So where do we stand? One thing that I've been looking for and haven't found, because in past elections, much has been made about Donald Trump losing the popular vote even while winning elections. I haven't seen a nationwide popular vote. Nobody's added it up, apparently.
Apparently, we can't do the math on that one tonight. And, of course, the Democrats have won 7 out of the last 8 popular votes in the presidential races, despite what happens in the Electoral College. And so it's interesting that we haven't seen any of those specific numbers coming out. And a lot of that may be just because there are so many votes out. And some of these are just, again, projections as some of these tallies come in. So they may be a little hesitant to throw all of those numbers out.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that for as good as the data is, for as predictory as it is different than a canvas. So let's just give the timeline for Utah. The vote ends tonight. That means anyone eligible, the counties have your ballot. Now, they're going to have a series of times, and this has existed in the history of voting. They'll canvass the election, which means the official count. They'll do the counties between the 19th and the 22nd of this month. But Utah will not put out their official canvass until November 25th. And that is when the actual results of the election were declared. I'm with you, Jeff. I'm a little surprised that between all of the sites we're tracking, we cannot find even an estimated national number. Now, going back to our favorite, the Needle was giving a percentage for Donald Trump, but there are no actuals, and I think it's important to remember that we're working on percentages.
Actually, let's go back to the AP and our good friend Todd Weiler weighing in, listening in, and thanks to Senator Weiler. So if we look at the popular vote currently, former President Trump is leading by about 4 million votes when it comes to that. So he is at 59,704,122. Vice President Harris is at 55,637,651. So about a 4 million vote difference. And so, again, we could be seeing something that we haven't seen a lot of. 7 out of the last 8 elections have been the Democrats winning the popular vote. And currently the former president is 4 million votes ahead.
You know, I noticed that we're at 200 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. It's 230 to 200. I think they just added on Oregon as the latest state going over to the Kamala Harris side. So 230 to 200.
Yes, and actually they've updated that to 205. Again, with Washington, Oregon, and California all called for Kamala Harris. She's now at 205 electoral votes, according to the AP, and former President Trump is at 230. And we're still just watching those numbers trickle in a lot of those battleground states. 83% of the vote is in Pennsylvania, and the former president still holds the lead there, 51.4% to 47.6%. So the gap is widening just a bit.
You're listening to election coverage on KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City.
Your voice, your vote, 2024.
You have a choice to keep Utah values.
We can do so much better than we have.
On Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out.
Are we ready to do this? We're ready to get out the vote?
This is special election night coverage on KSL News Radio. Here are Jeff Caplan, Boyd Matheson, and Maura Carabello on KSL News Radio.
We've been voyeurs tonight. We've been watching election results from afar while still waiting for our own here in Utah. We were told at about 10 o'clock tonight we might be seeing our first results. This is because of the long lines at polling places at 8 o'clock. Let's find out the latest from the state elections director. Joining us live on the KSL Newsline, Ryan Cowley. So where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so here in just a few minutes, we'll get the first batch of results out. The lines aren't quite all the way done, but they're just finishing up, and we'll get those results out here in just a few minutes.
So as promised, you're going to wait for the very last voter to finish voting, and then you're going to drop the election results. How much are we going to see tonight?
That's a hard thing to say. The counties will have better answers on that. It's basically what they processed. Now, typically, we do have about half of the ballots that get dropped on Election Day in the counties, either through the mail or through drop boxes. So there still will be a lot of work to do, but it will be a good portion of the ballots tonight.
So I'm assuming at this point you've checked in with all 29 county clerks a few times, other than what we've been talking about with some long lines and maybe some Utah County ink that they needed replaced. Anything else that happened today, or did it go pretty smoothly?
You know, it did go pretty smoothly. We did have some of those issues in Utah County with the ink and the paper. You know, there was just kind of a lack of preparation and pretty frustrating there. But overall, the clerks did a really good job. We did have some white powder that was discovered that came in an envelope at the Salt Lake County ballot processing facility. They did quarantine and take some time there to test and make sure that it was safe for the poll workers. But it was an amazing response from their first responders, and they were able to get back in there quickly. And, you know, for the most part, that didn't disrupt their day too much. It's pretty sad that those things happen. It's concerning that people do those kinds of things, and that definitely will be investigated. But other than that, around the state, you know, it was really good turnout, which is what we like to see, and just kind of those regular election kind of things that happen.
Yeah, and can you give us a little better sense in terms of what you expect those tallies to be in terms of voters actually showing up and casting their ballots today?
Yeah, I don't have a full sense of that. I think overall we'll hit that 85-90% turnout in the state of active voters, which is really solid. You know, as far as in-person turnout, I would probably say most of the counties will be right around 10% is my guess, but I don't have a solid number on that. That's just kind of my projection.
Ryan, you were very casual about 85 to 90% voter participation. Did I get that right?
That's correct. Now, that is of active voters. So that number, you know, is you know, people who typically do vote. But that's still a phenomenal number. That's really a great number.
So for comparison, Jeff, 2016 we had 82% turnout. 2020 we were just over 90%.
Okay, so we're in the pocket.
We're in the pocket.
It sounds stupendous when you compare it to off-year elections. I think that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And to a lot of the other states across the country. This is another good Utah model representation in terms of everyone leaning in and engaging and recognizing it's not just the top of the ticket races that matter. The things that people are showing up for are those school board races, district splitting races, local county council races. All of those matter, and Utahns show up for those.
So, Ryan, what when it comes to, we heard earlier reports of some provisional ballots, some emergency ballots being placed. What's the process there? Is there just is it just extra time by the clerks because they need to be hand counted and originally put into the data? What's the process when someone casts a provisional ballot?
Yeah, so provisional ballot is somebody who has moved, never registered, or hasn't updated their registration. So those, they do have to fill out a form that has to be verified by the poll workers. They typically take about 10 minutes each. And so, you know, when you think about line management and the volume, those do take a lot of time for poll workers. And then they cast their vote. Those are verified back in the clerk's office before the canvass. So over the next 2 weeks, the clerks will go through, verify all the information. If they meet the requirements to be able, the eligibility requirements to be able to vote, then that provisional vote will be counted.
Thanks a lot for joining us. Ryan Cowley, the state elections director, live on KSL News Radio. It's 10:05. So what's the situation here? Do we have numbers just dropping right now from Utah?
You know, so they're messing with us a little bit. We've got they've filled out the forms. We just don't have the percentages. But I see that as a good sign from it's coming to now we do have the candidates filled in, and we're just waiting for the first drop of data.
Did Ryan Cowley hit a button while he was talking to us? Is that what happened?
I don't think he told us, but I think he did hit a button.
We have a tweet here. I keep saying tweet. Are you allowed to say that still?
You can't. It's illegal.
Okay, a post on X from Mitt Romney about his replacement. John Curtis has admirably represented the interests of Utahns in the House, and I have no doubt he will continue to do so in the Senate. Our country needs more leaders like him, a man of honor and integrity who puts others before himself. Congratulations, Senator-elect. That again from Mitt Romney.
Yeah, and an important notice there. And again, the campaigns are continuing to march their way forward as they watch those, and the projections now seem very confident that the Republicans will take control of the United States Senate. If you look at all of the races that are remaining, you've got 9 races remaining in the United States Senate, and the Republicans have strong advantage. They could come away with a 5-vote advantage or more tonight with some of these remaining Senate races. So we could see the flip, and as we've been talking about, interesting countercurrent to all of that the Democrats still seem to be poised to snatch control of the House, so you could have a double flip in Congress in both the House and the Senate.
Eight seats left in the Senate to call, 42 Democratic seats right now, 50 Republican seats.
So the best they can do is hope for a tie, and that's extremely unlikely at this point.
Extremely unlikely in that. We also have a call out of Hawaii is the last call that the AP has made on the presidential race. Of course, that goes to Vice President Kamala Harris. So, again, we are at 209 to 230, officially according to AP, but Hawaii going into the Democrats' column on the presidential
Wait, are
race.
they done voting in Hawaii? Isn't it like 3 in the afternoon or something like that?
They have to, because they have to get out for the evening surf. So they got to get the votes counted and got to get back
Things
to the
are
beach.
different in Hawaii.
Yeah, point well taken. So, listen, it seems like perhaps the drama is dying down in Utah County. Let's check KSL News Radio's Hugo Ricard-Bell has been following all the events with the long lines and the ink running out in Utah County. Hugo, what's going on now?
All right, Jeff, I'm happy to report that the last few voters are in line, and they're actually in the room. Now, I caught up with Emma just as she was leaving, and she told me her and her friend had been in line for hours, and they just walked out then. But despite everything, her spirits were high.
I think it's cool. This is all of our first times voting because we were too young last time, but I think it's just cool because it's like what our mom tells us, like her grandparents, her grandmas and great-grandmas couldn't vote, and so they always told our mom, make sure you vote, because we weren't able to get that opportunity.
There are still a few people in line, but they're all in the actual voting room now for the first time, I think, all night. So I think it's safe to say the sun is setting on Utah County, and they're winding down as the last ballots are cast. So reporting live from Utah County Clerk's office, Hugo Ricard-Bell, KSL News Radio.
Boyd Matheson's bedtime reminder just popped up on his phone.
News alert. Can I get a breaking news for that?
That sounds like an election night. It's 10:09 at KSL News Radio, and we've been following these events in Utah County. One of our KSL News Radio reporters on the case, Eric Cabrera, who I believe is in Saratoga Springs right now. Eric.
Jeff, that's right, and I'm ready for a nap too, Boyd, just to let you know. So depending on where you live in northern Utah County, it's either Proposition 11 or 14 that would make the split happen. When I was in Lehigh talking to voters in line about 11, it was kind of a mixed bag of support. Here in Saratoga Springs, Council Member Chris Karn said residents here feel a type of way after a bond back in 2022 failed.
The failure of the 2022 bond was really the tipping point for our citizens out here, which started a groundswell of support from our citizens to say, what else can we do to support our children's future in education?
Right now, it's all quiet here with workers cleaning up the aftermath here inside this chapel where so many Utahns in Utah County came to make their vote count. Reporting live, Eric Cabrera, KSL News Radio.
Thanks a lot, Eric. So it seems like we're at the end of the drama in Utah County. The last few people are voting, and Ryan Cowley, the state elections director, just told us numbers for the state of Utah should finally be dropping, but shortly. So what is this about? The Washington Post has Utah numbers, but nobody else does?
Really interesting. If you go to the live feed on the Washington Post, as we've mentioned, we've got so many feeds open right now. And interestingly enough, the Washington Post is listing that Donald Trump has won Utah with 66% of the vote. They go down and pronounce John Curtis the winner with 68.4% of the vote. They even have, they state less than 1% of the votes counted, but they're showing Spencer Cox with 37%, Brian King with 29, and Phil Lyman as a write-in with 29. So they're listing 4,827 votes counted already in the governor's election. Now, again, Jeff's brow is furrowed because there are no official election results at the official Utah election sites. No one else has results, but Washington Post does. So
did they bring dinner for some county clerk somewhere down in southeastern Utah?
They hit up our friends in Paiute County and got all their votes. So I don't know how it happened.
Interesting situation. Where do we stand in the presidential race now? Because we've been talking about local events for the last little while.
Yeah, so here's an interesting thing. At the campaign watch party for the Harris campaign, which of course was in Washington, D.C., and on the Howard University campus, which of course is Vice President Harris's alma mater, they've actually cut the broadcast of CNN and its election night.
Wait, what?
They've cut that, as a lot of these races that have been close have been rolling in, and they've actually gone to just music blaring, little remix. I'm not sure whose playlist they're playing off of. But they have gone away from projecting up on the big screens there at Howard University CNN's election night coverage. And so, again, of course, it's a little after midnight there in Washington, D.C. So.
Is it me, or does this sound like Hillary's election night? Doesn't it?
Could be a little problematic.
It could be problematic. They wouldn't necessarily have different numbers than we're looking at unless they have some exit polling of their own, and maybe they do. But, maybe they are just setting the mood. Again, Jeff, you mentioned this earlier on. They forecast that Kamala Harris would come out tonight and speak to the crowd.
Yes.
So maybe they're just trying to get the mood up. There were some live feeds about an hour ago, and they were all reporting that the mood had kind of waned a little bit at the Kamala Harris celebration. So maybe this is just, getting the mood back up again.
Have we heard anything from Mar-a-Lago tonight?
Just kind of the regular thing. I'm going to check in with a couple of sources inside the room down there to see if we can get some insight in terms of where they are in this whole process. I think they have to be fairly positive right now, especially as you look at the results continuing to come in. Wisconsin continues to be a surprise 77% of the vote in Wisconsin, 51.2 for the former president, 47.3 for Vice President Harris. So that's when they've got to have some positive energy around. As well as Michigan. I think they're, again, exceeding expectations there, 52.3% to 46%, again, about halfway through the counting there in Michigan. And then, of course, all eyes on Pennsylvania. 85% of the vote is in now, 50.9% for the former president, 48.1% for Vice President Harris. So I think the mood has got to be dipping just a little bit in the Harris camp, and interesting to see what numbers they have. We do have an official call from AP for North Carolina. We have been projecting that was going to be the case over the last hour or so, and now the AP has officially called North Carolina into the Trump column. So, again, we're still sitting at 210 for Vice President Harris, 230 for former President Trump.
We have an election night update on KSL News Radio. Becky Bruce is standing by at the elections desk.
Yeah, Jeff, and by the way, Boyd, I just got that same alert about my bedtime reminder, so I feel your pain. It is going to be a long night, and we're here for it. The gap between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris is holding steady right now at about 20 Electoral College votes. Kamala Harris at 210, Donald Trump at 230. Here's what's still outstanding. We have Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Maine, and New Hampshire, and Alaska. If you combine all of those, we still have about 90 Electoral College votes to be apportioned between the candidates. Obviously, they're probably not all 90 going to go to one or the other of them, but between that number, it's more than either of them needs to get to that magic count of 270. Now, closer to home, Utah Congressman Burgess Owen says, whatever the outcome, we need to work across party lines for the good of our country.
We have a voting process. We wake up the next day. Whether we won or lost, we say, okay, well, what do we do now to win the next time? But we had faith in the system. We have lost our faith.
We're still waiting, of course, for those first results here in Utah. The last we heard from the Lieutenant Governor's office was that she expected an initial dump of numbers about 10 o'clock. Of course, we're past that at this point. Don't see any updates there, but we will keep you posted. At the KSL Elections Desk, I'm Becky Bruce.
Thank you, Becky. It's 10:16 at KSL News Radio. We have breaking news here in the Elections Center. We have local election results in the state of Utah. Finally, what are we looking at?
Yeah, we finally made it. Let's start out with just some overviews, and then we can start diving into county issues. But right now, it looks like with 20 of 29 counties reporting, Donald Trump has 50.65% of the vote. Kamala Harris has 47. Now, again, that's just a partial dump of the initial data that we have. More to come. It shows for U.S. Senate, John Curtis is at 55, almost 56%. His Democratic challenger is at 40%. Again, this is 20 of the 29 counties. And if you're saying, well, which counties? Yes, it does include Davis County. It includes 92% of Salt Lake County. It includes Uinta. It includes Rich, Grand, San Juan, Garfield, Beaver, and Juab. Importantly, again, it includes 92% of Salt Lake County. So you are going to see these numbers be Salt Lake County numbers. Blake Moore is coming in with 59% of the vote. Looks like a win for him there. Celeste Malloy right now, again, with 10 of 13 counties. She has 13 counties in her district. With 10 of them reporting, it's 57% for Malloy, 57% for Nathaniel Woodward. Mike Kennedy, who has 9 of 11 of his counties reporting, is at 58%. Glenn Wright, his Democratic challenger, is at 49. And Burgess Owens rounds out our congressional delegation. 3 of 4 counties that he represents have reported. He's at 54%, 40% for Catherine Follick Wang. And governor's race, we have Spencer Cox. This is 20 again of 29 counties. In the count includes 92% of Salt Lake County. Spencer Cox is at 52%. Brian King is at 36.93%. And that's what we have reporting right now on the governor's race. Attorney General's race, Derek Brown, 51%. Rudy Batista at 35%. And Michelle Quist is at 7%. State Auditor Tina Cannon is at 55%. We keep going down the line.
Let's take a quick breath there in terms of all of that. The governor's race again, interesting at this point. Again, more votes to be tabulated and coming in. Spencer Cox hitting that 50% mark. And again, that may be why some of the folks like the Washington Post were comfortable as they looked at their modeling that he did hit or appeared to be hitting that 50%. With Brian King at about 36, almost 37%. And then the write-in at about 8.3% in terms of those write-ins that have been tabulated thus far. So, again, interesting dynamics in terms of the governor's race, along with all of those congressional races and the Senate race, along with the Attorney General's race, all going pretty much to form. No real surprises there, either in terms of winner nor in terms of margin of victory. Pretty much what we expected.
Maura, could you explain where these votes are coming from? You say 92% of all of Salt Lake County's votes are included in that?
Yeah, it looks like they are. When we go over the result maps, they're showing that the precincts reporting so far are 92%. Included in that were Davis County's results at 100%. Rich County, importantly, who's missing. So if you're looking regionally, particularly like at a Celeste Malloy race, and certainly when we get to the state races, Washington County is not included yet. We do not have any results from Washington County. For those of us who need to shift our thinking in Utah to where people are living, we forget that we have a powerhouse metropolitan area now in Washington County that really can predict the outcome of some regional races. So it's significant in Celeste Malloy's race that we have not seen Washington County results. So I'm looking at a map and looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 counties in Utah who have 100% of their vote count in right now.
And the Wasatch Front is represented in that.
The Salt Lake County is, as is Davis County. We do not have results from Utah County yet. We don't have results from Morgan or Summit and Tooele.
Now I'm going to ask you, to go back to the presidential race, the Utah numbers on the presidential race.
Okay, so right now, as of this moment, with 20 of 29 counties reporting, Donald Trump has 50.64% or 281,000 votes. Kamala Harris has 47% or 261,000.
Is that a little surprising that it's that close?
It does show that there's a lot of split tickets this time around. We talked about that earlier in the night. The number of people who were saying, "Hey, I want this, but I don't want that," and it's not just saying, "Hey, I'm going to vote all Democrats or all Republicans." There's clearly some split ticket going on in terms of the top of the ticket, and a very strong showing from the Harris-Walz campaign here in the state of Utah.
But there are other counties still to check in. Will they skew those numbers significantly more?
You know, the skewing in the rural parts will just make a wider margin for those Republicans. They would be very unexpected if when rural vote counts come in, they don't disproportionately bring also in the Republican vote.
Because we would expect Donald Trump at around 58, 60% of the vote. Here he sits at 50 at this point, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, these numbers, to be honest with you, my response is he probably did better in Salt Lake County. We'll verify this number in a minute. That he probably did better in Salt Lake County than I would have suspected he did, maybe even did better in Davis County. Long held that Salt Lake County, even Salt Lake County Republicans, often vote Democratic, and Davis County has been a bellwether of sort of moderation. They split their tickets a lot. They like moderate people. They like mellow people. Those aren't usually words that describe Donald Trump.
Understood. So this is where we stand in the state of Utah. We have significant number of votes in. Do we have any of the down ballot races?
Yeah, I'm just reviewing those now. We do have some Senate races. If we want to dive into some of those, we've got Chris Wilson, who's winning handily right now. That's a senator. Incumbent, 86%. John Johnson, who's an incumbent senator at 55%, a Republican. Cal Musselman, let's congratulate him. He was running unopposed, and he seemed to have done well. He's gotten 100% of the vote in his Senate 4. Senate 8, Boyd heard from Todd Weiler earlier tonight, who I think is maybe still listening to the show. So congratulations to Senator Weiler, 47% of the vote, and he has two of his seats in. So he is winning his seat again. Luz Escamilla, who is in Senate 10, is a Democratic incumbent. It looks like she'll win. Karen Kwan, Senate 12, who's a Democratic incumbent, looks like she will win. Kathleen Reeby in Senate 15, a Democratic incumbent, looks like she's winning. Now remember whenever you listen to House races and Senate races, the numbers follow the state. The lower your number, the higher up you are. So House 1, tippy top, Box Elder County. Same with the Senate. So I just went through Todd Weiler is with our friends in Davis and Weber, and then we move into Senate 10 and 12 and 15, and those are all going to be Salt Lake County seats. So you learn to count kind of like when you see, a number 87, they're probably, a receiver. Kind of the same philosophy.
I get it.
We start at the top of the state and work our way down. So it looks like Wayne Harper, Senate 16, is the incumbent, is going to win. Lincoln Fillmore in Senate 17, 62% vote. Looks like he's going to win. Heidi Balderiti in Senate 22. She is an incumbent who did not have a challenger. Now we get into some multi-county races that are still not, our numbers aren't there yet. So I'm going to skip a few of those. We've got Kevin Stratton and Mike McKell who don't have enough yet to count. David Hinkins is an incumbent. He's getting 72% of the vote at this point. Darren Owens, who's an incumbent senator, running unopposed. So we keep going. The House seats look like they're too small to fill in. We don't have many House races. We do have a couple. This one was pretty close. It still has reporting to go. House 4 is a multi-county. It's Kira Birkland, who is the incumbent, running against the Democrat Chris Campbell. Jeff, that's a little close right now, 51.49% to 48%. So that, again, is House 4 and too close to call at this point.
Kira Birkland is a high-profile member.
High profile. She's done a lot of issues with women's sports and trans athletes and has a really strong social media following. So she has had a high-profile race and a high-profile challenger there. That's in Morgan County, among other counties. We have some unopposed with Casey Snyder. We have 77% Matthew Gwen. That's in House 6. Ryan Wilcox, who ran unopposed in House 7. Jason Kyle, a Republican who went unopposed in House 8. We've got Jake Sawyer, the Republican, who looks like he's going to win House 9. We do have, this was on everybody's hot list. I know it was on the desk's hot list. It's it's State House Race 10. And Rosemary Lesser is the Democratic incumbent. Jill Coford is her challenger. Right now, the race is 51.38% to 48.62%. It does look like Rosemary Lesser will hold her seat. That was one of the races to watch. That was a race that the Republican Party felt pretty good about taking over.
Where is that district?
It is a good question. I will look that up for you and
Fair
let you
enough.
know.
We could get to that. First, I want to bring an important point up. AP has said the Republicans have taken control of the U.S. Senate. That word is just in from the Associated Press. I want to bring you back to the Electoral College count. Donald Trump 230, Kamala Harris 210. 20 electoral votes separate them. Somebody has to get to 270. It certainly doesn't have to happen tonight, but it could.
No, and we asked the question of when we'll know, and I'm telling you, it more and more is shaping up. There's a couple of key pieces of the puzzle that have not fallen in, but certainly from a Senate point of view, as Boyd said earlier, it looks like the Senate is 51 to 42 right now, and it's pretty safe that the Republicans are going to be in play, if not really have a big victory. The House is still the U.S. House, still a little up for grabs, 177 to 144. Interestingly enough, Jeff, the modeling is still showing that it is likely that the Democrats may flip the House and take over the House. I'm going to repeat those numbers again because as of this moment, it's 177 to 144.
There's a lot of liberal West Coast still to come in.
Exactly. Now, what's interesting about the liberal West Coast is we've already counted their votes in the presidential. Remember, the Electoral College, so you look at this and think, well, wait a minute, does Kamala Harris have that much blue hanging out ready to get? Well, maybe, because we still have those big Rust Belt states to come in. But from an electoral college, from a presidential point of view, those Washington, Oregon, California votes have already been counted. And again, let's go back to where we are with the presidential. We're trying to get to 270. Donald Trump right now has 230. Kamala Harris has 210.
Okay, so the one state that we really haven't talked about, one of the swing states, is Nevada, where they have yet to count a single vote. Of course, the race hasn't been called. We're well along in Pennsylvania with 88% of the vote counted, Donald Trump leading by 3 points. But AP has still not called Pennsylvania with 88% of the vote in. We're not sure what that's about. They must know something about where votes are going to be coming in, and they're expecting this gap to be closed.
You've previewed this all night long. It's 50.9 to 48.1. So although we can see the 86% number, which is the total number of votes counted, we don't know. We're not looking at the granular results of where those are from. So less than 2 points are separating the two candidates in Pennsylvania. 85% of the vote is counted, and AP has still not called it. They've also not called Georgia yet, which is interesting because 93% of the vote is in Georgia, 50.8 for Donald Trump, 48.5 for Kamala Harris. Again, 93% of the vote is in. We're waiting for 7% of the vote. They haven't called it yet. The big states up top that we're watching are Wisconsin, and it's looking red right now with 51.1% for Donald Trump, 47.4 for Kamala Harris. Minnesota is performing for Kamala Harris right now at 50.9 to 47. And then Michigan, of course, is performing with 53% of the votes in, just over half, Donald Trump has 52%, Kamala Harris 46.2%.
I decided to go granular, do a Maura, if you will.
Okay.
I decided to take a deeper look into Pennsylvania and why it hasn't been called with 88% of the vote in. And I can't figure it out because 88% of the Philadelphia vote has already been counted. That is where Kamala Harris would presumably pick up ground. Also Montgomery County, 82% in. Kamala Harris would pick up ground there, but there's a lot of people who have already been counted. Likewise, Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh, 95% of the vote in. So I don't see where she's going to pick up more votes.
Well, so one of the things you have to look at in all of that, Jeff, is in those particular counties and in those particular areas, what is the margin that she is winning by? Because that's where it gets really interesting in the war room, is you start saying, okay, I'm winning this. Am I winning by a big enough percentage to make up the difference?
All right, let's take a look in Philadelphia. Not that I want to get this granular, but you got me started.
Let's go.
It's 10:30. Come on, let's go.
Philadelphia, is it really? Philadelphia County, Kamala Harris, 78%, Donald Trump, 21%. So that seems like a margin.
So now start doing the math. Extrapolate that out. I don't do math. We do words around here.
Right.
But if you start to play that out, how many votes have been cast? You can say, okay, if there's 20% of that vote left, and then if she's winning almost 80% of that vote, how many votes is she going to pick up? Is that going to move the needle?
Okay, I would open an Excel spreadsheet, but you did mention it's 10:30 at night, so let's move along. KSL News Radio's Maria Chaleos is out at the Republican Party in Draper. It continues, Maria.
It does. I'm still standing in the middle of a room full of people. Not as many people as we started out with, but they're still waiting. A few minutes ago, they were going through the local numbers that were in and cheering for their candidates. Right now, they're still waiting to hear from Mike Kennedy, who is running for Congressman John Curtis's seat. Right now, he has 58%, so they are waiting to hear from him. Apparently, he's going to speak in any minute via Zoom here. But yeah, we've heard from about 20 candidates for the state House and Senate seats since we spoke last. They all introduced themselves and talked about what's important for them in the race. And cheers went up as it was announced that the Republicans won the Senate. We did hear some beatboxing. You missed the beatboxing a few minutes ago. And yeah, we are just still standing by. They're anxiously waiting for all the results to come in.
Okay, you want to recreate the beatboxing?
I could not recreate it. However, Claire did put up something on social media, so you can catch it there.
Okay, it'll be at KSLNewsRadio.com and on our Facebook, our Instagram, and like that. We're not sure. We think the Associated Press has finally called the Utah governor's race. The page keeps disappearing at the Associated Press website, but it shows Governor Cox with 54% of the vote. That's 370,000 votes. I presume Brian King at 34%. The names are blocked out, but I'm guessing who it is by their totals. Brian King at 34, and I guess Phil Lyman at 7.7. But again, that's not fact. That's a guess. What I can tell you is AP has called the race for Governor Cox.
They have called the race, and again, over 50% there for Governor Cox. So that's a good night, I think, for the governor. I think they'll count that as a big win in this kind of unique election cycle. And it will be interesting to see what his pivot is and what his message is coming out of this. He's been positive on social media throughout the night. He's already congratulated Brian King in his race and others who were part of that race. And now it's on to the governing portion of the program. And that's always the test in this. What's the pivot and where do you go from here?
Well, we keep pivoting from the local to the national. Vice President Kamala Harris, we learn, is not planning to address the public this evening, according to a person familiar with the White House who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the matter.
Yeah,
so there you go.
Just about a minute ago, that report came out that she is not going to address the public. Again, we know they shut CNN and the election coverage off at Howard University, where the election watch party was.
So what does this mean? They have a gigantic screen that's showing CNN, and every time results come in, the crowd is supposed to say, yay!
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything good for Kamala Harris, Jeff. I mean, there's no way of not sort of taking in this information and suspecting that at the very least they're feeling tight about it.
So, Boyd, you've been in the room where it happens. You've handled candidates. At this point, while they're shutting off CNN, while they decide not to speak, is somebody sitting Kamala Harris down and saying, listen, this isn't going to be working out tonight for us.
So I don't think they're to that point in the program because, again, we still have 7 states that have not been called. We still have a lot of votes that are yet to be tabulated. But if the staff is doing their job properly, they are having the but if not conversation. You always have 2 speeches prepared on this night. You have the winning speech and you have the but if not we come up short.
Are they both loaded into the teleprompter?
They should be.
They should be, and they both have been rehearsed and practiced. But I think the circumstances around this election are important. I mean, Boyd and I have both been in the back room where you have to tell your candidate that you're about to lose, and it is time to muster and go out there and look your volunteers in the eye and lose well. That is not where we are tonight, and I think a couple of factors are in play. One, clearly, there's no degree of confidence. I mean, I think she's at best tight. The other thing that becomes really interesting in modern politics is the gamesmanship of it. Yeah. And I will say, with an election this close, you want to be careful about what you say tonight.
Yes.
And you want to be careful about potential challenges and lawsuits based on indicators of what you're saying. So I know that they had legal advice coming into tonight. I know that they were looking at what they could do, the Harris campaign, what they could do in response to a Donald Trump, what they would see as an early declaration and how they could counter that legally. So I will say there's a bit of calculation going into speech making tonight that we don't always have in American politics.
And the rule is always, if it's this tight, you do not concede.
That's right.
Because there will be legal challenges. And again, this is part of our process. Sometimes we get all in a knot over someone filing a lawsuit or a challenge, but that's part of the process. And we adjudicate those, we work those through, and then we get to the confidence of the result. And so definitely there's no reason or no way for her to concede anything. She's just saying, we're not going to know enough tonight. And so I think she's signaling to her supporters, maybe y'all ought to go get some rest because we may have some work to do tomorrow. And let me just give you one quick example, Jeff, of that. So the AP has just come out with an update about Georgia. We've been talking about Georgia all night, one of those critical swing states. Former President Trump has been leading throughout the night. We're getting down to those last few votes. And the AP said that while Trump continues to lead by about 120,000 votes, over 90% of the estimated votes have been counted. Trump and Harris roughly split the more than 4 million votes cast before Election Day, and Trump was ahead in votes cast on Election Day by about 8 percentage points. So they're saying, look, we still have some more things to count, and there's still a path. And that is the one thing that I have learned in my conversations with AP over the years. They will play out all the modeling until there is no path for the person who is behind to catch up or to win. And so they're watching all of these so closely. And currently, AP is saying Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, there is still a path to victory. So we're not going to call it.
Maybe you can explain this because I decided to blow up the map of Georgia and Fulton County, which is Atlanta. 95% of the vote is in, but you say, look at the numbers. Kamala Harris, 72%. Donald Trump, wait a minute, I just lost my county. Donald Trump, 27, 72 to 27, but 95% of the vote is in.
Right, but if she's winning at a rate of 7-2, basically, with all of those remaining votes, that's going to make it up the difference in terms of, again, looking at about 120,000 votes separating the two. That's a big county. There's a lot of votes to be counted, even though they're down to 6 or 7% left to count. If she's winning 7 out of 10 of those, that's going to start changing those numbers, and you have to look, is there a plausible path to catch up?
So we mentioned Kamala Harris is not going to speak tonight. Donald Trump is said to be making his way. He's been spending the evening at Mar-a-Lago, but there's an election party at Palm Beach Convention Hall. He's said to be making his way over to Convention Hall right now, according to ABC. There is no word whether he plans to speak tonight. I'd like to venture a guess that he will.
I'd bet the ranch. In fact, I bet Mar-a-Lago on the fact that he will. And so, again, this goes back to what Maura was talking about just a few seconds ago in terms of the gamemanship. And is former president going to go out and try to declare a victory or to say it's a certainty that he's going to get there? And then what will the Harris campaign do if he does speak and if he does say, we're going to win tonight? that becomes very interesting dynamic. Will the Harris campaign feel they need to maybe change course and counter that message, and how will they counter it?
Well, let's go back to local news. KSL NewsRadio's Hugo Ricard-Bell has been in Utah County at the clerk's office and around the community throughout the course of the evening, looking at the long lines and the problems they had in Payson. Hugo, where are you right now, and are they done voting finally?
Jeff, so I am actually right back where I started at the Utah County Health and Justice Building, and where I'm standing right now, I'm in I suppose you would call it the lobby, guys, and I don't know if you can hear the echo, but it's empty. For the first time in 12 hours, this place is not packed to the rafters. I just saw the last voters walk out about half an hour ago. Big smiles on their face, relieved that it's all done. So, yes, they are winding it down here at the Health and Justice Building and packing up.
So if they're packing up, Hugo, you get to do the same. Have a good night, and thank you for your work out there in Utah County, where it's been a little bit dramatic this evening as people were lining up on long lines to vote this evening, and it's finally done. KSL News Time, 10:42. What do we have on the presidential race? Has anybody been watching The Needle? Anybody?
I haven't. I got so engrossed in local, Jeff. So I'll have to go to The Needle, but then I want to talk about some constitutional.
The Needle shows a 92% chance of a Trump victory at this point.
Okay, The Needle started out the night at 50.
Started 50-50.
It started at 50-50 with its projection. So that is not great news for the Kamala Harris campaign.
Again, it's not a prediction of the future. It's based on everything that's happened to this point. The New York Times predicting Donald Trump will end up with 302 electoral votes, more than enough to win. Kamala Harris with 236.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's getting narrower and narrower as it does at the end of the night. But we keep talking about this. We're rounding up, and that decimal dust starts to add up. I mean, the window is closing, definitely, it seems, on the Kamala Harris campaign. But there are 4 and 5 really important states that have not come in yet.
And still, one of them, Nevada, where we haven't seen a single vote counted yet. What's going on
Curious
there?
thing. I mean, every single prognostication device that we're using tonight shows this vague gray area that is Nevada and zeros when we try and pull
Is
up
that Area
results.
51?
Now it's finally come to be that the aliens have, in fact, taken over Nevada.
Well, listen to this summary. Counting usually takes days in Nevada, but new technology and rules could speed up reporting. Postmarked ballots are allowed to arrive up to 4 days after the election. That would take us to November 9th.
Right. And we're just going to have to get used to this, that it is a voting season and then a vote counting season as well. While we're refreshing our national polls, I'm going to just cut for a second to some results with local election results.
Can we go to I want to interrupt. Can we go to the Harris campaign? There's a speaker up on the podium. Let's find out what's going on.
This is the co-chair of the Harris campaign. Oh, just wrapped up. Very short speech. Looks like he was just making the announcement that she would not be addressing. Thanked everyone for being there tonight. And more to come on that. Cedric Richmond, and of course he is the co-chair of the Harris Waltz campaign, came out, tell everyone, go Harris. Thank you all. Very brief comments there from the Harris campaign, and we can see now on our monitors that all of those assembled there at Howard University, the alma mater of Vice President Harris, are leaving the rally. They're leaving the celebration.
This is the sad part where they shuffle out.
They are shuffling out, but again, I think it was still a hopeful message from the co-chair of the elect committee, saying this is not over. We're going to continue to watch this play out overnight and into the morning hours. So interesting message from Cedric Richmond, just saying that we will not hear from the vice president tonight, but don't count it as done yet.
Meantime, News Nation is reporting Trump is expected to speak in Florida at the Palm Beach Convention Center, where thousands of people are going to be gathered to listen to whatever he has to say. And we think we know what he's going to say. He's going to declare victory, even without the electoral votes in the bag.
I think it will be an interesting weave, as the president likes to call it, and where he goes. This will be very telling in terms of his confidence factor, what his team is telling him. And again, the predictors are starting to say it looks like things are starting to tip as we get down to those smaller and smaller percentages left in places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia. And the former president continues to hold those narrow leads. It appears that he has a pretty clear path. The difference will be the pixie dust that Maura was talking about, the dust of those last few percentage points and percentages of percentage points that could be the difference.
And we should expect that Donald Trump would be very sanguine in a speech for two reasons. One, we've been looking at the data, and it looks like a good night for him. Two, President Trump's manual says go in strong. I mean, he is an exception to every political rule, and part of it is that his degree of confidence in himself is always on a 10 out of 10. We should expect that tonight. And thirdly, it's a great strategy for him. It's a nice strategy if you're looking at the charts and you're looking at how well you're doing. It's a really smart strategy to strongly declare victory and make them take it away from you at this point if you think like Donald Trump thinks.
Yeah, it's very much out of the Trump playbook.
That's right.
To be sure. This is chapter and verse in terms of declare it, make them take it away from you if they have to, and you begin to build that case. And again, just looking at all of those numbers, if you look at Arizona, it's 0.72 is the spread right there. Pennsylvania, 2.55 ahead for the president. Harris is winning by about 3.5 in Minnesota. Former President Trump is ahead by about 3.5, 3.53 in Wisconsin. And then if you look at some of the others that are still yet to be called, Michigan being the other one, where surprisingly the former president has a 6.1% lead over Vice President Harris in Michigan. That one may be the most telling and the most surprising of all.
And that kind of painful stuff is going to show up when we start evaluating who showed up, I think. You know, if she loses there, I think we're really going to see a picture of who came out to vote.
Yeah, and one of the interesting, we had a fascinating conversation today with Alexander Bolton from The Hill about what it would mean for either of these parties to lose and what the conversation becomes about the party. So if the Republicans lose the White House with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket 3 cycles in a row, we're going to go now live.
We're going to interrupt. Governor Cox is now making his victory speech at the mansion. Let's listen.
I just received a call from Representative Brian King. He was incredibly kind and gracious, and I want to thank him for the campaign that he ran, and thank him for the great phone call that we were able to have tonight. It was a wonderful discussion. We served together in the legislature, and I'm just so impressed with him and with his passionate followers. Tonight was a great night for the state of Utah, and really put an exclamation point on everything that Lieutenant Governor Henderson and I and our cabinet, our senior staff, the entire state of Utah, the legislators, mayors, commissioners, and the good people that live here have been able to accomplish over the past 4 years. We live in an amazing state, and we've been able to solve so many of our biggest problems together. We were able to do record tax cuts. We were able to give record increases in funding for our teachers, able to hold social media companies accountable, and we still have more to do. We know that we have to work to lower the price of housing so that our kids and grandkids can afford to live here. Build those 35,000 starter homes over the next 5 years. We know that we have to double energy production in this state and across the country, and Utah is going to lead the way in making that happen as well. We're going to continue to work to fight the terrible opioid addiction and homelessness that is plaguing so much of the country, but also impacting us here. And we look forward to collaborating and working together to solve those problems. Now, this is a great night for us, and obviously lots of people are celebrating. There's some people who aren't celebrating tonight who didn't have as good a night, and I want to thank them as well. Again, I want to thank Representative King and his supporters, Representative Lyman and his supporters, everybody who ran tonight, and the people who supported them. We were not elected to just represent the people who voted for us. We were elected to represent everyone in the state of Utah, and our promise, as it has always been, is that we will will work harder than everyone else, and that we will represent you. We will listen to you. We will learn from you. We have learned so much listening to the people who disagreed with us, who didn't vote for us over the past several months, and we're better leaders because of that. We look forward to continuing that dialogue and hearing from you, and working together to make better decisions. I'm so fortunate to have an amazing lieutenant governor. These are difficult days for lieutenant governors. I know, because I was one, and it's definitely been a long day. We appreciate the patience of everyone. The right to vote is so critical to who we are as a nation, and I'm grateful that we were able to keep polling places open so that everyone was able to vote. I'm grateful for the poll workers and the county clerks, everyone who has dedicated so much to get through today and to preserve these freedoms that mean so much to us. So again, congratulations to everyone who won tonight. It's been a good day across the state of Utah for Republicans, a good day across the nation as well. And with that, Lieutenant Governor, say a few words.
Thank you, Governor. I echo the words of Governor Cox. We are committed to making sure that we're representing all of Utah, not just the people who supported us politically. We came into office 4 years ago with the idea that we would make sure that Utah stayed special, that Utah was a leader in so many ways. And it's been a challenging 4 years, but we've been able to, I think, do a lot of really good things. We're excited about doing good things for the next 4 years. And I do want to say to the media that's here, I want to thank you for the way you have stepped up to make sure that Utahns have accurate voting information. We could not do what we do without the information that you put out to voters. And we're grateful for that. I am personally grateful for that. So I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you for doing your jobs well. Even if sometimes we don't like what you say, you do your jobs very, very well, and we want to acknowledge that. Thanks, Governor.
We're happy to take a few questions.
Governor, address the main allegations in Phil Lyman's claim. Did anyone in your campaign recruit the other two Lymans to get in the race?
No, they did not. Look, these are hard campaigns for sure, and a lot of allegations have been thrown out there for sure, and that's. Those things happen. I wish they didn't happen, but they did. And so we're here, and we're going to continue to serve. We're grateful that the people of Utah saw through those allegations and those lies, and that we were able to be reelected tonight. And again, we are going to work with everyone, the people who supported him, and we understand the passion behind that. But we look forward to mending some of those fences over the next few months and years.
Madam Lieutenant Governor, was it a mistake to wait to release the partial vote results until after the last voter voted tonight?
I don't think it was a mistake to wait. No, in fact, it's common practice. We wanted to make sure that people were able to vote without the influence of knowing what the results were preliminarily.
What was the breakdown tonight?
We're still waiting for all of that. The breakdown. Oh, the breakdown in. So. Yeah. Let me address that. I don't know that there was a breakdown. I don't think we can necessarily call it a breakdown. What we had was an influx of new voters, really. A lot of these are provisional ballots, and provisional ballots take a lot longer. We did learn some things, and the good thing I think about elections is every time we see a bump or a little mistake, we learn from it. So what we have seen that next time we can improve the process for provisional ballots. I think that will help. We'll make that easier for people, easier for the clerks. We, had a lot of people show up on election day to vote in person, and people, we encourage them to, vote early next time. Most people did vote early, but it was those provisional ballots, I think, that really held up a lot of those lines.
Was there a reason a couple counties had problems and the other 20 plus?
Well, look, clerks are required to have in-person polling locations on election day, but they're not told how many to have. They're a lot of that is up to them. They're required to have a certain amount based on the law, but some of that is up to them. And I think there was just a little bit of a failure to plan appropriately, especially for one county in particular. But I do want to acknowledge that the poll workers, the election workers in all of our counties were just incredible. They did their jobs well. Nothing goes perfectly in elections. When you have a system run by thousands of individuals, you're going to have some human error. That's just part of the process. Grateful for the Utahns who are patient, really grateful for the voters who stuck it out in line in the cold. If you're going to have a problem, having a lot of people show up to vote is a good problem to have.
Which county failed to plan?
There was a little bit of a problem with planning in Utah County.
Any advice you'd have for that county clerk, or what happened in that county that could have gone better?
Well, I think that's something that we'll look at and maybe talk through with him and see if there are better things that can be done next time.
Governor, can you please talk a bit more about how you plan to build bridges between Utahns after this very contentious election cycle?
Sure. Yeah. Well, again, elections are always contentious. You can go back to the founding of our nation, and it's been a hallmark of American politics for sure, and not just American politics, but all across the globe. And I think the way we do that is to listen and to be responsive. And the successes will speak the loudest, and what we're able to accomplish. Again, the people have spoken, and they like what we've accomplished over the past 4 years, and we have more to do. And I think by solving those problems, working together, working collaboratively with those who disagree with us, will certainly help to mend some of those fences.
What did you learn?
Hey guys, we're going to do one more question with this one,
Yeah.
okay?
And Governor, speaking of contention, you weren't the biggest fan of Trump forever. Things are tight right now. If he does become president again, how will you work with him to improve Utah?
Yeah, we'll work very closely with him. Over the past few months, I've had an opportunity to establish a very positive relationship with him, and there will be lots of opportunities. We have a list of things ready to go to work on if he's successful. It seems I haven't seen the latest numbers. I know an hour ago it was looking very good. I don't know if things have changed at all. We've been very focused on our race tonight, so I'm a little behind on what's happening nationally. But I said today on social media, I've been saying it for a long time, that I would, for everybody out there, when someone tells you that one person getting elected will destroy our country, like, you shouldn't listen to those people. Our country is so much bigger and stronger than any one person. So whatever happens tonight or over the next couple days, as the ballots are all counted, whoever that winner is, Utah will be successful. We've proven we have a track record showing that we were incredibly successful during a Trump administration, and we were incredibly successful during a Biden administration. Now, it was a lot harder when we had to sue the administration 60 plus times, as we have done over the past 4 years, but even so, we were able to be successful. So if President Trump wins, we will have a very positive working relationship.
You think in July, you said you thought he could moderate his tone, unite the country, bridge the divides. You still, since then, probably hasn't lived up to that hope.
Yeah, no, he and I have had conversations about that. His style is obviously very different than ours, and it's.
You're listening to Governor Cox on his re-election, offering what I would call a victory speech alongside the lieutenant governor, but this one is a bit strange. On the steps of the governor's mansion, there's a private party going on inside, but he came out with the lieutenant governor, no wife, no kids, nothing like that. This is not the standard victory speech.
No, and they actually spent most of the time not talking about the victory, but talking about the process of what's going on with the election results and some of the challenges that we had here in the state today.
Yeah, as we just heard it really just turned into an impromptu press conference, which was interesting for election night.
Okay, so this is KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City. You're listening to continuing special election coverage. Maura Carabello, Boyd Matheson, I'm Jeff Caplan and Maura. You had some numbers about the amendments here in Utah.
I'm just going to give you some highlights of local elections. We had some amendments on the ballot. We'll all recall that the constitutional amendments A and D were controversial, and we didn't vote on them. That left a B, which was all about school land, trust land, and whether we wanted to spend more money on it. Almost 71% of us said, yeah, we do. It passes easily. Constitutional Amendment C, which is about guaranteeing sheriffs in our Constitution. 81% of us so far are agreeing with that. There are some, that's 23 of 29 counties in, but those all have safe leads. Earlier tonight, we were talking about one of the hottest places for competitive races was going to be Salt Lake County. It looks like Salt Lake County sweeps with Democrats for assessor, recorder, surveyor, treasurer. ZAP, Zoo Arts and Parks tax, that's kind of beloved. It looks like it's performing at about 80% right now. An interesting one was there's a jail bond to rebuild Oxbow Jail. It's going to be too close right now. 50% say no, 49% say yes, and there's still enough left to look at. And then District 6 is the incumbent Dia Theodore. She's only at 50%. Her challenger, Zach Robinson, is at 49.87. So if you live in District 6 in Salt Lake County, too close to call. And District 4 went Democratic, as did the at-large. So by and large, a good night for Democrats in Salt Lake County on those results. Things look like they're passing except the jail. The jail is still up for grabs. And then the results most people have been waiting for, yes, all of our judges will be retained.
That is not a surprise, is it? A tick in the Electoral College vote. Donald Trump at 247. Kamala Harris at 210. Again, of course, you need 270. Interesting, there are some organizations that apparently are calling Georgia for Donald Trump. However, the Associated Press has not done so. Let me read you a statement from AP. Trump is, you have something there?
They called Trump. As you were speaking, as it happened all night long, they have just called Georgia for Donald Trump 50.9% to 48.4%.
Where does that leave us with Electoral College?
Donald Trump is at 247. Kamala Harris is at 210.
Okay, so Georgia was included in those numbers we were giving.
Correct.
Okay, meantime, Donald Trump is supposedly at the convention center, Palm Beach Convention Center in Florida. He is expected to speak to the crowd. We don't know when. That could mean in 3 minutes. It could mean in an hour and a half.
It could be, but I think it is 1 a.m. Eastern time, and it is still a large crowd there at West Palm Beach Convention Center, and we are expecting to hear from him soon.
We have 75% of the vote in now for Nevada, so we do have numbers now for Nevada. It's showing with 75% of the vote in. Donald Trump has 50.9% of that vote. Kamala Harris, 47.5%. So it's headed to Trump right now with 57% of the vote in.
However, Clark County, Las Vegas, has not reported any votes yet, so this will probably change.
See, we're going to get you in the war room before we're done, Jeff.
I want to be a political consultant now.
Also, really important to note as we kind of bring things to a close here tonight, if you look at all of these, the path continues to narrow for Vice President Harris. It's narrowed in Arizona. It's narrow in Nevada. It's incredibly narrow in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And the fact that they have called the race in both North Carolina and Georgia for former President Trump, that means in order for Vice President Harris to win, she has got to come back in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. If she does not come back in those three, she does not have a path to the presidency.
It's not over yet. The needle is leaning, but it's not quite there. Donald Trump at 95%.
Yeah, going to bed tonight. If anyone's planning on sleeping anytime soon and you're a Trump supporter, you've got to feel good. If you're a Kamala Harris supporter, you're probably pretty tense right now. Another indication of this, before we close, the Senate right now, 51 senators who are Republican, 42 who are Democrats. The House right now is at 184 for Republicans, 155 for Democrats, with only 96 races still left to call.
That's been narrowing over the last hour.
It has.
And where do we land? Are they still leaning toward the House is going to go Democratic, or we're not sure?
The predictions are still showing a Democratic House.
Yeah, I still think that if you're playing the numbers, I still think the Republicans take the Senate. They've got that 51, and it's still leaning for the Democrats to flip the House. That's a double flip. Very, very rare. Divided government.
I want to take a moment to thank some of the people that have been working with us this evening. Our producers, Andy Cupp and Jessica Lowell. Our reporters out on the street, Maria, Eric Cabrera. Who else has been out? Hugo, out in Utah County over the course of the night. And our board operator extraordinaire, Alex Brown. Thank you so much. And to the two of you, it has been wonderful working with you this evening. I get to be in the room where it happens here at KSL, and it's a privilege and a pleasure.
Always a good night, and great to be with the best of the best here on KSL News Radio.
Yeah, great night.
We appreciate you listening. We're not going to leave you in the lurch. ABC News coverage will continue into the night as they continue to count the votes, and as we continue to wait for Donald Trump to speak down in Florida. Stay with us at KSL News Radio.
It's